Hey guys, tonight we're slipping past the monastery walls, through the heavy wooden doors of a medieval convent somewhere in the 12th century, and we're definitely not supposed to be here. You're about to become a young woman of noble birth, cloistered away behind stone and silence, wearing wool habits and murmuring daily prayers in Latin you barely understand. You've taken vows of chastity, poverty and obedience. But let's be honest, none of that guarantees anything, especially in a place where the church locks you away and assumes no one will ever come looking. This is a life of shadows and whispered sins. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Not just because of disease or starvation or childbirth in secret, though, yeah, those are all on the menu, but because in this era, knowledge is dangerous, curiosity is forbidden, and desire. That's a one-way ticket to punishment, or worse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm guessing it's either 11 PM or 3 AM, because when else would you be wondering about medieval nuns' sex lives? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 15, maybe 16, and the world you knew is gone. Your family has arranged for you to enter the church, which sounds noble, but really just means they couldn't afford your dowry. So here you are, head shorn, heart pounding, walking into the convent's inner court with two things: your new name and the creeping suspicion that this is not a holy place. Your cell is bare. A straw mattress, a wooden crucifix, a single candle, and the lingering scent of incense and mildew. You're shown how to fold your habit, how to fasten your belt of knotted rope, how to kneel until your legs go numb. The other nuns smile, but not always kindly. Some of them are older, with hard eyes and tight lips. Others are your age, lively-eyed, whispering under their breath, hands brushing each other's in ways that linger just a little too long. Your days are scheduled to the second: vigils, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. Eat, pray, clean, repeat. But it doesn't take long to notice the cracks in the facade. The abbess drinks wine from a flask hidden in her cloak. The laundry nun disappears for hours and returns with her cheeks flushed. One of the sisters, Sister Agnes, seems to know exactly how to make the candlelight flicker in just the right way when she tells bedtime stories. You learn that silence doesn't mean peace, it means secrets, and it turns out you're not the only one keeping them. One night during compline prayers you hear muffled sounds coming from the chapel corridor. At first you think it's someone crying, then laughing, then something else. You're not supposed to leave your cell after dark, but let's be honest, you do. Barefoot and breathless, you creep along the cold stone hallway, the only light a sliver of moon slicing through the stained glass. You stop just before the chapel door. There's movement inside, two shapes. One is definitely Sister Beatrice. The other, you think it's Father Leon? Yeah, the priest. You slide back to your room so fast you nearly trip over your own robe, and for the next 3 days Sister Beatrice walks around with the expression of someone who just tasted honey for the first time in a decade. Let's pause a second for some actual history. Nuns, especially in the high and late medieval periods, weren't all locked up by personal choice. Many were sent by families looking to reduce their daughters' expenses or avoid scandal. The church idealised celibacy, but records, especially later discovered in Inquisition documents, suggest that even within monasteries and convents, human desire wasn't exactly banished. In fact, many convents were oddly flexible when it came to enforcing rules, especially if the nuns were noble and brought wealth with them. And here's the quirky twist. Some nuns had pet cats and birds they treated like soulmates, like literally held funerals for their parrots. Emotional intimacy had to go somewhere, right? Of course, there's debate among scholars about how widespread sexual relationships were within convents. Some say they were exceptions, others argue it was just rarely recorded, not rare. Diaries, confession transcripts, and even some surviving letters suggest a level of romantic and erotic expression that shocked church authorities when discovered. Still, without consistent documentation, historians argue over whether these were isolated scandals or part of a more common pattern, hidden by layers of ecclesiastical control and revision. Back to you. You're praying harder now, not because you feel holy, but because your thoughts drift way too easily to Sister Agnes. She touches your shoulder when she passes. You feel it for hours. She sings during vespers, and her voice slices through your ribs like a knife dipped in honey. One night she finds you in the library. Yes, your convent has one. And she slides a book across the table. It's Latin, handwritten, the ink still clear. You read a few lines. Your face turns red. It's not scripture, it's not even poetry, it's, well, let's just say it involves a nun, a knight, and some very inventive uses of a chalice. You look up. Agnes is smiling, and you suddenly realise this life may be many things. Lonely, cold, full of rules. But it's not boring, not even close. The convent is quieter in the early morning, when mist clings to the cloisters, and your breath puffs visibly in the cold air. You wake before the bell some days, not out of piety, but to catch that liminal moment when no one's watching. It's in these silences that things slip through, the low hum of a lullaby from another cell, the way Sister Agnes's feet barely make a sound when she moves past your door, the warm echo of your own thoughts daring to imagine something more than prayer and porridge. You're adjusting, or pretending to. You know the pattern now. Bells ring, bodies move, mouths stay shut unless God is being invoked. But below the rhythm something else pulses, a kind of current. No one names it, but you see it in stolen glances and the way certain sisters linger just a second too long when they pass each other communion. You see it when the abbess assigns you and Agnes to clean the same corridor 3 days in a row. Coincidence? Maybe. You're not exactly arguing with it. Agnes never says anything too bold. She doesn't have to. She simply becomes a part of your hours. Her voice floats beside yours in the choir. Her fingertips brush yours when you pass the wash basin. One night she finds you in the sacristy, alone, lighting candles. She offers to help, but neither of you touches the flint. You both stand in the quiet, watching shadows dance along the walls. Then she says, "It's hard, isn't it?" And she means everything. The vows, the silence, the pretending. You nod. Nothing else is needed, for now. There's a lot the Church doesn't mention when it talks about convent life, like the fact that girls your age enter cloisters with no idea what their bodies are capable of, no education on desire, only shame and guilt. The rule of St Benedict, the official code by which you're supposed to live, demands obedience and chastity, yes, but also humility and silence. It creates structure, but also repression. And if repression had a scent, it would smell like the stale wax and damp wool that clings to your robes. Now here's a fun fringe fact. Some convents, especially in wealthier regions, quietly allowed for more relaxed interpretations of the rule. In one German convent, records show that nuns were permitted to wear silk under their habits, because no one would see it, and it kept their skin from chafing. But also, let's be real, because rich girls like to feel good. And when silk slips against your skin after a day of manual labour and abstinence, it's not just a textile, it's a revolution. You learn soon enough that spiritual life and bodily life don't always align. During confession, you kneel before Father Leon, eyes lowered, heart pounding. You haven't done anything yet, not really, but your thoughts are distracting. He asks about your soul, about impure temptations, and you try to stay vague. But he's not vague. He leans closer. His breath smells of cloves and something stronger. He tells you that doubt is natural, that even saints struggled with temptation. And then he places his hand briefly over yours, just a second too long to be fatherly. You say nothing because that's the safest thing to say. You're not the only one he's ministering to. There's a rhythm to these secrets, and you're starting to hear it more clearly. The tapping of fingertips on a wooden pew during morning prayer. The coded coughs, the whispers about Sister Clara being moved to the infirmary without explanation. Sister Clara, who used to be round and bright-eyed and laughing, now she's pale and silent, and visibly thinner, except in one place. You understand before anyone says it out loud, so does everyone else, but no one says a word. You start noticing things, like the way the infirmary has an extra bed behind a curtain, or the way the midwife from the nearby village is allowed in through the back door late at night. You learn that the convent has its own network of silence, a conspiracy of nods and side-eyes and forgotten candles left burning as warnings, and Agnes is growing bolder. During prayers, she sits close enough that your knees touch. One evening, while everyone's in the refectory, she pulls you into the old records room, locks the door behind you, and kisses you so softly it feels like a dream. You're shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer shock of being touched like that, like your body was made for something more than kneeling. You don't tell anyone. But something in you opens like a window that's been stuck for years. The air rushes in, and it smells like possibility. Historically, some convents kept detailed records of unusual punishments, nuns caught in improper positions, or with letters of excessive affection. There's even one case, buried in an Italian archive, describing two sisters who were found entwined in unnatural embrace, and sentenced to a month of fasting and isolation. But here's the thing, the letters they wrote, some of them survived, and they're not just romantic, they're sensual, poetic, deeply human. These women weren't monsters or deviants, they were lonely and alive. Of course, modern scholars debate the meaning of these texts. Were they romantic or spiritual, platonic or erotic? Some argue that medieval women lacked the vocabulary to describe same-sex love as we understand it today, and so their letters read ambiguously. But others insist the passion is clear. The metaphors are coded, sure, but the heat is there. And so is the risk. You start hearing rumours that the abbess once had a special friend who was sent away, that Sister Beatrice was nearly expelled until she offered to fund the repair of the bell tower. Money buys silence sometimes, so does loyalty, but not always. One night, you and Agnes find yourselves alone again, this time in the old chapel storage room behind a curtain of moth-eaten tapestries. You don't plan it, it just happens, and when it does, it's slow and strange and sacred in its own way. Not perfect, not like the stories in the book she gave you, but real. Afterward she lies beside you and whispers, "Do you think God is angry?" You say, "If he is, he can take it up with me directly." Outside, the bell tolls for vespers. Inside, your heart is thudding like it's calling for something else entirely. You wake up the next morning with a familiar ache in your back from the straw mattress, and an unfamiliar ache somewhere deeper, somewhere you're not supposed to acknowledge. Agnes has already gone, slipped out into the grey light of dawn like nothing happened, but the warmth of her skin still lingers against yours, phantom-like, as if the night carved a memory into your bones. You stare at the ceiling, wooden beams crawling with cobwebs, and you wonder, was it real? Did it count? Did anyone hear? You move through the day as if nothing's changed. You chant psalms, scrub bowls, sweep the hallways, but your hands move automatically and your mind doesn't. You catch Agnes in the refectory, eyes locked for a heartbeat too long. She smiles softly before turning away. You'd think she was unaffected if you hadn't seen how she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. That evening the abbess gathers everyone in the chapter house. Her voice is grave. There's been a complaint from the bishopric, an anonymous letter claiming there's been impropriety in the convent. She doesn't name names, but she doesn't have to. You feel the energy in the room shift like a ripple through water. Someone knows something, or thinks they do. The investigation begins the next day. Not an inquisition, not yet, but the church sends a canon lawyer, a man named Brother Donnell, to observe. Observe what exactly? Everything. He walks through the convent with the air of someone who enjoys power a little too much. He watches meals. He watches prayers. He interviews the sisters individually. You're summoned on the third day. He's polite, smiling in that way that tells you he's already decided what he believes. He asks about your background, your family, your health. Then he eases in. Have you noticed any behaviour that might concern the church? You shake your head. You keep your face calm, but your palms are sweating, and you can feel your pulse pounding in your throat. He nods, jots something down. And Sister Agnes? You're close with her, yes? You pause half a second too long. Yes, you say. We arrived the same year. He nods again, says nothing. But when you leave, you see him watching you walk away through the narrow leaded glass. Agnes doesn't speak to you for 2 full days. Not out of anger, out of fear. She moves around you like you're both covered in oil and afraid of a spark. You hate it, but you understand. You remember what you heard about Sister Clara, and you remember the stained spots of red on the infirmary linens. Historically speaking, this wasn't uncommon. In many medieval convents, accusations of misconduct could come from jealousy, revenge, or even boredom. With dozens of women locked away together, tensions brewed. Add a visiting priest, a wandering eye, or a forbidden letter, and it didn't take much to ignite scandal. Confessions could be coerced, witnesses unreliable, and the punishments? Variable. Sometimes it was prayer and fasting, other times exile, or worse. And here's a quirky little gem. Some convents actually kept sin books. Literal books where sisters would confess to everything from stealing extra bread to mutual touching. These books were often locked away, and some had pages torn out when new abbesses took over. No one wanted the old sins resurfacing. Debate still swirls around how real or exaggerated some of these cases were. Some scholars argue that church authorities inflated minor offences to justify cracking down on women's autonomy. Others believe that certain convents had developed semi-underground cultures of resistance, sisterhoods within sisterhoods, where rules were bent, relationships were hidden, and support systems kept everyone quiet. Back to you. A week passes. The investigation concludes without punishment, but not without impact. You don't know what the canon lawyer wrote or who he talked to, but Sister Judith is suddenly sent to a Benedictine house miles away for health. Sister Anne begins fasting aggressively, though no one asked her to. And Agnes? Agnes starts sleeping in the choir loft, alone, under the pretense of better focus during nocturnes. You don't question it. You just listen to her voice float down during midnight prayers like it's reaching only for you. Then, during laundry duty, you find the first note. It's slipped into your habit pocket, carefully folded, sealed with wax. Latin script, neat and slanted. It reads, "When the soul burns, it must be hidden from flame. But what if the flame is within?" You press the parchment to your chest like it's a relic. Over the next few weeks, the notes continue. Always anonymous, but always clearly from her. References to psalms that double as confessions. Descriptions of dreams that echo your own. Sometimes they're poetic, sometimes blunt. Once, she writes, "I remember your breath more than the gospel." You reply, "Of course." Short lines, disguised as theological reflections. You tuck them into the altar flowers before Vespers. One time, you nearly get caught. Father Leon enters just as you're adjusting the vase. He says nothing, just watches, smiles, leaves. You start to suspect he knows more than he should. Then comes the night when Sister Agnes isn't at Compline. The choir sounds thinner without her. After prayers you go looking. You find her in the herb garden, barefoot in the moonlight, cloak around her shoulders. She doesn't turn when you approach. "They're going to send me away," she says softly. You feel the cold air leave your lungs. She turns to face you. Her eyes are rimmed red but dry. "I overheard the abbess. They're writing to my family. They want to arrange a transfer." You step closer, feeling the distance like a wound. "Why?" "They say I'm too distracted, too emotional, that I might cause unrest." You want to scream, but you can't. You just grip her hand in the dark and pull her toward you. The kiss is rougher this time, desperate. You press your foreheads together and try to memorize the moment. "I'm not going without you," she says. That night, for the first time, you ask yourself if escape is even possible. If there's a world outside these walls where two women like you could just exist, be human, be free. You don't know the answer, but you do know that this isn't sustainable. This double life, these secrets layered like veils, like lies stitched into your daily prayers, and soon something, or someone, is going to break. The day after the herb garden confession, the air in the convent feels different, charged, like a storm waiting to break. The sky's too clear for thunder, but you can feel it in your joints, in the whispers that die when you enter a room. Agnes is avoiding you again, not with anger, but the kind of stillness a deer uses when it's cornered and trying not to breathe too loud. You want to reach for her, but every glance is now a risk, every touch a potential witness. You don't speak for 3 days, not because you're angry, but because there's nothing safe to say. Instead, you write. Carefully. You tuck your letter inside the psalter you know she reads during quiet hour. It's just a few lines. You tell her that you've dreamed of the two of you walking beyond the gates, barefoot, holding hands like it meant nothing to the world, because that's what you want most, for it to mean nothing to everyone else and everything to you. She doesn't respond, not in writing, but during Compline, when the final candles are extinguished and the choir files out in silence, she brushes her fingers against yours. Just once, quickly. It's enough, for now. The abbess starts holding meetings more frequently. You're summoned twice in 1 week to discuss your devotion. She's calm, but you can feel the tension behind her words. She asks about your studies, your sleep, your commitments to the rule, and then she asks if you've been distracted lately by earthly attachments. Your stomach clenches, but you don't flinch. "No, Reverend Mother," you say. She smiles, that tight smile that never reaches her eyes. Good, you're being watched over. You leave the room unsure whether that's meant as reassurance or a threat. Historically, this was common, especially in larger convents with complex hierarchies. Abbesses were often former noblewomen with significant social power. They were enforcers, but also guardians of reputation. If scandal broke under their watch, it reflected not just on the convent, but on the entire patronage network supporting it. And when nobility was involved, as it often was with upper-class girls sent to the cloister, cover-ups were more likely than confessions. One curious historical twist: in some cases, the church would quietly reassign nuns who posed a problem. Transfers to distant priories were framed as spiritual refocusings, but often they were strategic removals, like moving a pawn before it could become a queen. In one case in 14th century France, a nun with a suspiciously close relationship to her abbess was sent to a remote convent after anonymous notes surfaced. The abbess mysteriously stepped down soon after. The notes, no surprise, were never found. That's the kind of silence you feel tightening around you now. You spend your evenings in the scriptorium pretending to copy hymns, but your hand trembles, your Latin blurs, and your eyes keep flicking to the window, watching the sun sink over the walled garden. You imagine slipping through the gate, walking into the woods until the chanting fades, and the only sound left is birdsong and breath. You imagine Agnes beside you, but then you remember, the outside world isn't much kinder. 2 women on their own, poor, unmarried. They'd call you witches if they were being creative, or just take what they wanted and leave your bones in a ditch. Still, the fantasy keeps you going. Agnes does respond, eventually. A folded scrap under your plate during the noon meal. Meet me after terce, in the old storeroom. You do. The room is dark, dust dancing in the single beam of light slicing through the high window. She's already there, pacing. She looks thinner. Her eyes have the fevered shine of someone who's been praying too hard or not sleeping at all. "They're sending me," she says, "to the priory in Elmsbridge." You sit down, your legs weak. That's nearly 2 weeks' travel. You'll never see her again. She kneels beside you, grabs your hand. "Come with me." The idea is absurd, and yet your heart leaps. You whisper, "How?" "There's a merchant's caravan passing near the orchard gate on Thursday. I've overheard the abbess's servant arranging deliveries. We can hide in the barrels, or in the hay cart. We can be gone before sunrise." You blink at her. She's serious. "I'm not asking you to risk everything," she says, "but I can't stay here, and I can't leave you." You think of the quiet mornings, the shared prayers, the letters, the risk, and then you think of what happens if you stay, alone, watched, suspect, what they'll do when she's gone. "I'll come," you say. You spend the next 2 nights awake, faking sleep, ears tuned for any signs of alarm. You stash your essentials, a spare habit, a tiny bit of bread, the psalter she gave you. Every sound feels like doom. Every creaking door is a gallows forming in your mind. And still, you prepare. Now for a strange historical aside, there were in fact documented cases of nuns escaping convents. In one bizarre 15th century case, 2 women disguised themselves as friars and travelled across France for months before being recognised. When caught, they refused to repent, claiming their love was ordained by the Spirit. They were punished, but not executed. Their story survives only in an inquisitor's diary, which reads like a frustrated parent trying to discipline 2 wild daughters. Back to your escape. The night before you're set to leave, you get a visitor. Not Agnes. It's Father Leon. He enters your cell unannounced. You sit up quickly, the psalter clutched against your chest. He doesn't bother with pleasantries. "I know," he says, "about you 2. Your heart plummets. He steps closer, voice low and slick. "I could report you, but I won't, if you agree to something." You feel the cold roll over you in waves. He smells like incense and sweat. "You're confused," you say, praying your voice doesn't shake. "Oh, I'm not," he says, "but I think you could be convinced to turn to a more acceptable path." He leaves without touching you, but the implication festers. You tell Agnes everything. She's silent for a long time. Then she says, "All the more reason we have to go. If we don't, he'll make your life hell. or worse. The plan is set. Thursday morning, just before dawn, a prayer, a breath, a final glance at the only walls you've ever known, and then freedom, or something like it. You don't sleep that night. You don't even bother closing your eyes. Sleep feels dangerous now, like if you give in for even a second, you'll wake up too late, or worse, wake up still here. So you lie on the straw mat, fully dressed beneath your habit, your bundled possessions tucked into a cloth bag beneath your head. You listen to every creak, every distant cough, every gust of wind pressing through the cracks in the ancient stone. At some point the bells toll for matins. You don't go. You're not going to be around for Lord's anyway. Agnes finds you behind the orchard wall just as the stars begin to fade. She's wearing her travelling cloak, hood pulled low. Her lips are pale, her breath shallow. But her eyes are fierce. She clutches a small sack to her chest, and when she reaches you, neither of you says anything. You just stand there, forehead to forehead, two ghosts already half vanished from the life you knew. The plan is simple. Dumb maybe, but simple. The merchant's assistant is supposed to stop at the outer gate for a routine wine delivery. The cart is large, covered with a canvas tarp, and usually left unattended while the assistant negotiates with the abbess's steward. If you're fast, you can climb into the barrel compartment unseen. From there, it's hours of silence, jostling and praying. Ironic, considering you're using the church's own wine cart to escape its grip. Everything goes according to plan, until it doesn't. The assistant shows up late. The steward isn't alone. There are two guards with him this time from the nearby priory inspecting the inventory. You're already crouched behind the barrels when you hear their voices sharp and close. Abbess has had trouble with girls going soft in the head lately, one guard jokes. Best make sure no one's gone missing. Your heart climbs into your throat. Agnes squeezes your hand so hard it hurts. But somehow, by some miracle, or maybe just the guards' sheer boredom, they don't check. They spit, laugh, and walk off. The assistant clucks to the donkey, the cart lurches forward, and you're on your way. Your knees ache, your lungs burn from holding your breath, but you're moving. Outside. The road jolts you awake from your fear. Trees blur past through cracks in the tarp. Morning light creeps in like a secret, illuminating your face and hers in soft gold. You can't speak. Not yet. But you're both crying. Silent, relieved, terrified tears. Now, here's a weird historical note to tuck in your bonnet. Convent escapes weren't unheard of in the Middle Ages, but they rarely ended in happily ever afters. Escaping meant excommunication, and excommunication meant social death. No legal standing, no family inheritance, no protection. In some cases, runaway nuns were hunted down by the church and dragged back in shackles. There's a record of one nun in 1348 who made it all the way to Venice, disguised as a sailor, before being recognised by a travelling bishop. He was scandalised, and also, according to his own records, strangely intrigued. Back to you. The cart finally stops near a small roadside chapel, a day's journey from the convent. The merchant's assistant, young, grimy, and clearly underpaid, throws open the tarp and nearly falls backward when he sees you. Agnes acts first. She drops a handful of coins into his hands. "You didn't see anything," she says. He hesitates. Then pockets the money and walks off, muttering something about never trusting the pious again. You roll out of the cart stiff and bruised. The road stretches in both directions, endless and sun-bleached. You've never been anywhere without walls before. It's dizzying. You both sit under a tree for a long time, just letting the wind pass over your skin. It feels wrong not to have bells telling you when to move, but it also feels incredible. Like your body belongs to you for the first time in forever. Eventually you make a plan. Agnes knows of a small town about 5 miles north, Swanmere. It's got a quiet priory and a leper house, which means no one asks too many questions. You can pose as pilgrims, as sisters in mourning. Anything really, as long as you keep your heads down and your stories straight. The walk is brutal. The sun bakes your robes. Your shoes aren't made for travel. Your legs feel like they belong to someone else by the time you arrive. But Swanmere is real, small, cluttered, and blissfully indifferent. You trade one of your silver hairpins for a room in the back of a tavern, run by a woman with no teeth and no questions. You collapse onto a real bed and fall asleep holding hands. For 2 days, it's paradise. Quiet. Warm. Software. You stay in bed most of the time, tangled together like seaweed, whispering what-ifs and could-we's. You plan imaginary futures. Maybe you'll go to the coast. Maybe you'll open a laundry, or join a group of travelling pilgrims. Maybe you'll never settle at all, just keep moving, keep choosing each other. Of course, nothing perfect lasts. On the third day, a rider comes through town. He's in church robes, not from your convent, but nearby. He speaks to the tavern keeper, then to the market women. You stay hidden, but your gut tells you he's looking, and if he's not now, he will be soon. Agnes watches him from the window. Her jaw clenches. We can't stay, she says, so you move again. From town to town, changing names, changing stories. In one village, you're widowed sisters. In another, you're a noblewoman and her handmaid. You find small work. Agnes sews. You teach letters to children. Some people are kind, others aren't. But no one knows, or at least no one says they do. Historically, it's unlikely two escaped nuns would have gotten far without help. But women did help each other. There were networks, small, quiet, dangerous, of midwives, widows, herbalists and exiles who looked out for their own. These women weren't saints, but they knew what it meant to survive a world designed to forget them. There's still scholarly debate over whether these support systems were intentional or incidental. Some say women simply did what they had to. Others argue that these were proto-feminist collectives hidden in plain sight. Whatever the case, they mattered. And maybe, just maybe, you've stumbled into one. But even now, weeks later, free and far away, you sleep lightly. Every knock could be a priest. Every stranger could be someone from the past. You still have the Psalter. You read it before bed, and between the verses you slip in the notes she once wrote you. One night, in a borrowed cottage under the stars, you ask her, "Do you ever regret it?" She looks at you like you're mad. Then she kisses your forehead and says, "Only that we didn't run sooner." You close your eyes to the sound of owls and wind in the trees, and for the first time in your life you don't feel trapped. You feel chosen. A month goes by, then 2. You count the time not in days, but in markets visited, safe beds found, and the number of times you and Agnes pass for ordinary. That's the real miracle. How easily the world accepts the lie when you offer it with a straight face and clean hands. You begin to look less like runaways and more like travellers. Tired women on a pilgrimage. Quiet, respectable. The sort no one bothers unless they're bored or drunk. You've learned how to walk with purpose, how to fold your veil just right so it hides your cheekbones, how to lie without blinking. But even as you master survival, Agnes is slipping. Slowly. She hides it well, but you've shared too many nights and too many secrets to miss the signs. She's quieter. Her fingers tremble when she threads a needle. She doesn't hum anymore when she sews. You try asking gently, but she waves it off with a smile. "Just tired," she says. "It's nothing." It's not nothing. You finally get the truth in the back room of a stonemason's cottage, 2 villages south of a town that may or may not have seen the abbess's guards pass through. It's raining outside. A dull, drumming rain that sounds like it might never end. You're curled together on a mat, your arm around her waist, when you feel her flinch. Not a gentle, half-asleep twitch. This is sharper, deeper. She sighs. Her breath catches, and then, quietly, "I think I'm ill." Your stomach twists. "Ill how?" She doesn't answer, but when you light the candle and pull the blanket aside, you see it. The bruise-coloured flush on her chest, the 2 thin wrists, the way her skin seems to glow with fever even in the candlelight. She's burning from the inside. You fetch water. Herbs. Anything. But you both know there's no monastery infirmary now, no well-stocked convent storehouse with jars labelled in careful Latin script, just scraps and guesswork. And prayer, if that still counts for anything. The next day she collapses while walking. You carry her, awkward, stumbling, desperate, into a tavern that smells of smoke and old bread. The innkeeper, a thick-armed woman with a mouth like a sailor and a heart like melted butter, sees your panic and simply says, "Upstairs. 3rd room, no charge." You settle there for 3 days. Agnes barely eats. She sweats through the sheets. You sit beside her, sponging her forehead, whispering bits of scripture not because you believe they'll work, but because they're the only words you remember that don't hurt. The innkeeper brings food, brings herbs, brings a midwife who looks at Agnes, frowns and says, "Not plague, not consumption, could be just worn thin." Worn thin. as if a soul could stretch too far and finally just fray. Here's a dark little footnote from history. Medieval medicine was as much guesswork as mysticism. Most convents had herbal gardens and a designated sister trained in physic, often through word of mouth or books passed between abbesses like contraband. But outside that system, care was inconsistent at best, and for women like you, technically outlaws, there were no doctors, just hedge witches and luck. Some scholars argue that the healing work women did was intentionally erased by church historians, especially when it fell outside formal approval. Others think it was just the usual story. If it doesn't serve the dominant narrative, it gets forgotten. Either way, you're on your own. Agnes doesn't die. Not yet. On the 4th day, she opens her eyes and whispers your name. You cry so hard she shushes you, laughing hoarsely like she's scolding a child. You kiss her cheek and promise you'll get her to safety, even if you have to carry her all the way there. That night the innkeeper brings news. There's a woman, she says, setting down a bowl of soup. Lives 2 miles outside the village, knows things, helps women like you, women who need disappearing. You hesitate. You've heard stories about these kinds of women. The church calls them witches, heretics, temptresses, but you've also heard other stories, ones whispered in the back of convent kitchens and between nuns who've seen too much. Stories where those same heretics were the only ones who ever really helped. You take the risk. The next morning you bundle Agnes in every blanket you can find and help her onto the borrowed cart. The path is muddy and narrow, more deer trail than road. The cottage, when you find it, is barely standing, moss-covered, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, chickens scattered around like sentries. The woman who opens the door isn't what you expect. She's young, sharp-eyed, dressed like a widow, but with arms strong enough to lift a sack of flour with one hand. She looks you over, then looks at Agnes, and simply says, "Well, bring her in then." Her name is Miller. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't pray. She just gets to work, stripping Agnes down, mixing herbs, heating cloths, mumbling to herself in a dialect you don't recognise. You try to help, but she waves you off. She needs rest. You need food. Sit. So you do, because you're too tired to fight anymore. That night you sleep on a mat by the fire while Agnes sleeps in a real bed for the first time in weeks. You watch the flames and wonder if this is the end, or a new beginning you haven't earned yet. Miller keeps you there for 5 days. In that time, Agnes starts to recover. She can sit up, eat, smile. Miller teaches you both how to identify fever root and how to boil down sheep's milk with lavender to calm the stomach. She never says why she helps women like you, but you start to see the truth in her small bookshelf, tucked behind a curtain, filled with copied pages of banned texts, healing manuals, women's writings, even a few old letters you'd swear came from a cloister. It's not much, but it's hope. Historically, women like Miller existed, though their names didn't survive. They were midwives, healers, outcasts. The church both needed and feared them. In some cases, nuns themselves would smuggle herbal remedies from these women back into their convents. It was a web of silent mutual survival, a conspiracy of care. You stay with Miller for nearly 2 weeks. By the end of it, Agnes can walk again. She even laughs, a real laugh, the kind that starts low and shakes her whole chest. She holds your face and says, "You saved me." You want to say, "No, you saved me first." But the words catch in your throat. When you finally leave, Miller gives you a small bundle, dried herbs, a flask of tincture, and a necklace made of carved bone. "For luck," she says, "and protection." Agnes puts it on immediately. You take the road west this time, new names, new lies, but now you also carry something else, a quiet promise that if anyone comes for you again, you won't run. You'll fight, because now you know you're not alone. The necklace doesn't look like much, just a bit of smooth bone strung with sinew and worn by age, but Agnes wears it like a relic. Every night she runs her thumb over it before sleep, the way she used to press her fingers to the edge of her psalter. And when you ask what she's thinking, she only shrugs. If we're already living on borrowed grace, I'd rather borrow it from someone like Miller than the ones who locked us up. Fair. You've stopped worrying about blasphemy. Survival feels holier than anything the abbess ever preached. The western roads are kinder, in that they're less patrolled. You travel mostly at dusk and dawn, staying ahead of anyone who might be looking. sleeping in stables or tucked under hedges when you must. You become experts at pretending. Pilgrims, cousins, widows, nuns searching for a new convent, though that one makes Agnes gag. "I'd rather dig graves," she says. One rainy afternoon, you find shelter in a crumbling chapel on the edge of a deserted village. No roof, just old walls and a shattered bell tower, its rusted clapper swaying uselessly in the wind. You make camp there, lighting a fire in what used to be the nave. That night you curl up beside the ashes of forgotten saints, and Agnes pulls something out of her satchel. It's a bundle of folded papers, worn, ink-stained and smelling faintly of oil and beeswax. At first you think it's more letters, but when she lays them out in the firelight you see what they really are, poems, written in her hand. You lift one and read aloud. It's in Latin, but not liturgical. The lines are rhythmic, sensual, painfully specific. One stanza compares a woman's laughter to the flutter of a dove's wings against bare skin. Another talks about shared wine and mouths brushing like stolen prayers. You're blushing before you finish the third line. "You wrote these?" you ask. Agnes shrugs. "Started back at the convent. Never finished. Too afraid someone would find them." You're stunned. Not just by the boldness of it, but by the beauty. These aren't clumsy scribbles. These are full of craft and longing and the kind of desire you thought had no place in sacred spaces. And yet here they are. You lie back on the cold stone floor and stare up at the night sky through the broken roof. "Do you think we're sinners?" you ask. Agnes lies beside you, cheek to your shoulder. "If we are, then so was every woman who ever wanted something she wasn't allowed to name. And there it is. Historically, there were women like Agnes, nuns and laywomen alike, who wrote about love and desire, sometimes even in the language of devotion. There's one particularly mysterious manuscript known only as the Oxford Sister, which contains dozens of Latin poems attributed to an unnamed cloistered woman from the 13th century. Some scholars argue they were spiritual allegories. Others, especially the modern ones, say, not a chance. The imagery is too physical, too focused on breath and touch and hidden rooms. And the truth? We'll never know for sure. The author never signed her name. There's an open debate about how common this kind of writing was. Some believe it was widespread, tucked into the margins of prayer books, whispered in scriptoriums when the priest wasn't around. Others insist it was rare. Dangerous, yes, but also profoundly brave. Either way, the fact that any of it survived tells you that the hunger to speak, to remember, to claim, was stronger than fear. The next morning you find ink and begin writing back. You craft your own poem, rough, unpracticed, not nearly as polished as hers, but honest. You describe the first time you saw her at the convent gates, her voice during Compline, the way she laughed once when a candle sputtered out during Mass, and how it made you believe, just for a second, that God had a sense of humour. You trade poems across days and miles, not always in verse, sometimes just a line scribbled on the back of a tattered page. "I watched you sleep and forgot I was afraid," or "There are nights I miss the silence of the cloister, but only when you're too far to touch." You begin storing them in a little box made from scrap wood and beeswax. It feels ridiculous and sacred, like your own private liturgy. But not everything is soft. In a larger village, you pass a chapel with new plaster and fresh banners. A priest is preaching on the steps and a crowd is gathered. You stop at the edge, careful to blend in, and listen just long enough to catch the message. He's talking about those who abandon their holy vows, about the women who serve the devil under the guise of affection, and you don't need him to say the word lesbian, because he doesn't know it. But you know who he means. You step back. Agnes puts a hand on your arm. Her face is unreadable. Later, in the safety of a field beyond the town, you say, "Do you think they'll ever stop hunting us?" She thinks for a long moment. Number. But maybe one day they'll stop recognising us. That night you both fall asleep beneath the open sky, surrounded by wildflowers, with the stolen psalter and your poetry box tucked between you, like relics from a lost religion. And here's a strange footnote. In some medieval convents, there were indeed secret chambers, scriptoria minor, or hidden reading rooms, spaces where the sisters would copy texts by hand. Some were sanctioned, others not so much. A few of these hidden alcoves contained secular or even erotic texts, passed down from sister to sister, under layers of cloth and code. Scholars still argue about whether the church knew and turned a blind eye or was truly ignorant. But those rooms existed, quiet corners of intellectual resistance. just like the one you're building in your satchel. Eventually you make it to a seaside town. Real sea. Real salt on the air. You haven't seen water like this since you were a child. You sit on the shore with your feet in the surf and watch Agnes laugh as she lets the wind tear through her hair. For a few blissful moments, you aren't fugitives. You're just women. Here, now. A merchant tells you about a port in Brittany that takes on quiet help. Women who ask no questions and expect none in return. You decide to go. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe. To think. To write. You buy passage with the last of your coin and spend the final night on land curled up on the sand watching the tide rise. In the morning you sail. Neither of you knows what's waiting across the water, but whatever it is, you'll face it with ink-stained fingers, worn sandals and a necklace made from a bone you've come to believe in more than any relic in Rome. The boat is a low-slung fishing vessel with peeling paint and a name you can't pronounce. Something Breton and briny carved into the hull like a whisper of old salt. You and Agnes huddle beneath the tarpaulin with 2 goats, a barrel of smoked eel, and a pair of fishermen who barely speak Latin and definitely don't care who you are as long as you don't vomit on the cargo. The channel is cold and mean, and the crossing isn't graceful. You spend most of the trip gripping a rope and trying not to think about death by drowning. But Agnes holds your hand, and somehow that steadies you better than any anchor. By the time you reach the port town, rosy-stoned and wind-lashed, you both look like the sea spat you out. The harbour master takes one glance and waves you through. No questions, no inspections. You're just 2 more wet ghosts with nowhere to be. And in a town where half the population fled the last plague wave and the other half talks to God more than they talk to each other, no one notices 2 ex-nuns wrapped in borrowed cloaks. You rent a room above a dried fish shop. It smells like brine and despair, but the owner doesn't mind if you pay in coin, bread or sewing work. Agnes mends nets. You help copy receipts in mangled French. It's not holy work, but it keeps you warm. You learn to hide in plain sight, to be useful, unremarkable. But even in this sleepy, salt-rusted village, the past clings like seaweed. At night, you dream of candlelight and stone floors, of bells and psalms and the feel of Agnes's hand brushing yours in the dark. Sometimes the dreams turn sour. Father Leon's voice, the abbess's eyes like steel, the sound of cloister doors slamming shut forever. You wake up gasping. Agnes pulls you close and hums lullabies you used to hear echo through the convent walls, but now they sound like spells, soft and binding. One evening, while sorting through scraps in the fishmonger's refuse pile, don't ask, you stumble upon a battered wooden box wrapped in oilskin. Inside, silk. Real silk. Torn and stained, but unmistakable. Beneath it, a rolled parchment, inked carefully, reverently, in a script you recognise instantly. It's a prayer. But not the kind you'd ever hear from a pulpit. The words are for a woman. About a woman. Desperate, intimate, raw. Lord, grant me the strength to see her without falling to ash. Let my hands remember her skin and not be cursed. If this is sin, then let sin taste like honey, because I will not spit it out. You show it to Agnes. Her eyes well with tears, and she holds the parchment like it's been waiting for her. Someone lived here, she says, who felt exactly like we do. A ghost sister, a soul cousin. Long gone, but leaving behind proof that you're not the first. Historically, things like this did happen. In the margins of medieval texts, between the lines of liturgical books and market records, scholars have found fragments, not full confessions, but hints. A line in the wrong place. A sentence that reads too tenderly. Some dismiss them as coincidence. Others, especially newer historians, argue these were coded notes. Tiny bursts of rebellion from women who couldn't speak openly. It's still debated, of course. Was it romantic, platonic, allegorical? But that's the beauty of it. When the records are unclear, you get to choose the story that fits. You and Agnes take the parchment and fold it into the Psalter, a hidden page in your revolving gospel. A few weeks later, the weather shifts. The wind turns crueler, the ski more leaden. Work dries up with the cold. So does bread. The town becomes less friendly. The fishmonger starts locking his shop during daylight. You begin to hear rumours of church investigators combing the countryside again, asking about a nun with a limp and her companion with bookish tendencies. That's the phrase. bookish tendencies, as if reading could damn you as quickly as touching. One morning a friar arrives in town. He's clean and polished and looks wildly out of place in the fish-slick streets. He preaches a homily on the pier about moral decay, about temptation, about women who stray from the safety of walls. You don't look at Agnes. You don't have to. You can feel her jaw clench beside you. That night you both agree, it's time to move again. But this time it's different. You're not just running, you're hunting, looking for something. Maybe another woman like the one who wrote the parchment. Maybe a place. A home. Not a hiding place, but a real one. You travel inland, slow and cautious. Fields stretched like sheets, frost-crusted and pale. You trade needlework for shelter, copy psalms for bread. You stay in shepherds' huts and abbey ruins, and once in a deconsecrated chapel where moss grew over the altar and a squirrel nested in the baptismal font. And then, in a crumbling village tucked into the elbow of a forest, you find something unexpected. A convent. Abandoned. Not burned. Not desecrated. Just empty. Vines crawling up the stones. Iron hinges rusted shut. You pry open the gate with a crowbar given to you by a suspiciously helpful blacksmith. Inside, silence, dust, birds nesting in what used to be the library. It feels haunted, but not in a terrifying way, in a waiting way. You explore it slowly. The dormitory is still lined with narrow beds. The refectory benches sag but hold. The chapel roof leaks, but the altar is intact. You find candles in a drawer, stiff with age. And then, tucked in a carved wooden chest near the sacristy, you find the jackpot. Letters. Hundreds of them. Folded neatly, some sealed, some loose, all written in a tangle of hands, some Latin, some French, a few even in Spanish. Not just prayers, confessions, poems, love notes, pages torn from journals. It's a vault of memory, a shrine to silence and what women said when no one was supposed to hear. You read them aloud by candlelight night after night. You and Agnes take turns, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes holding hands so tightly your fingers ache. One letter simply reads, "I told her I loved her. She wept, then kissed me. Then we prayed together, and I felt no shame." Another says, "If the church will not hold our names, we will write them in the margins and be immortal there." You decide, then and there, to stay. Not forever, but long enough. You clean the dormitory, repair the door, patch the chapel roof with scraps. You plant herbs in the courtyard, using the knowledge Miller gave you. You build fires. You copy the letters one by one, adding your own. You begin a new book. Your book. A record. A history. Of escape. Of defiance. Of love. It begins to feel like yours. Not overnight. Not with trumpets or revelations, but slowly. Like ivy claiming a wall. The abandoned convent doesn't care who you were. It doesn't scold or test or wait for confessions. It simply stands, stone by stone, offering what's left. And what's left turns out to be plenty. Shelter, silence, and the peculiar comfort of forgotten things. The ghosts don't mind you being there either. If anything, they make room. You whisper your thanks in the empty corridors. You light candles for the sisters whose names you find carved into the beams above their beds. Some are saints, maybe. Others, definitely not. You and Agnes fall into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, clean, mend, copy. Sometimes you sing just to hear something echo in the chapel again. You scrub the old lectern with vinegar and prayers and return it to the altar, as if the act of putting it there might sanctify whatever you speak from it next. You open windows that haven't seen light in decades. Dust dances in the air like ash from a fire long gone out. There's a kind of power in reclaiming space like this. Not just physical space, though yes, the way you hang your shared robe on a nail or boil. Roots in the kitchen hearth feels like defiance, but emotional space too. You can breathe here. You can think in full sentences again. And you can feel things deeply without fearing who might be watching. That alone feels like a miracle. One afternoon, while clearing out a rotting cupboard in the scriptorium, you find a scroll bound with red thread. It crackles when you unroll it. The Latin is faded, but you recognise the words, a medical treatise, written by a woman, not copied from a man's texts, authored. It's signed simply Sister E. It includes anatomical sketches, herbal recipes, and a lengthy section on unexplained swelling of the womb. You blink. Reread it. She's talking about pregnancy, more specifically about nuns becoming pregnant. Agnes reads it next. Her face hardens. She knew, they all knew, but they couldn't say it aloud. Historically, they did know. There are accounts, not many, and always wrapped in shame and passive voice, of nuns giving birth in secret, of convents hiding pregnancies by quietly sending women to other houses or reporting them as death by illness. One infamous record from a 13th century German abbey mentions a sister who passed into heaven after delivering a soul born in sin. That's how they phrased it. No mention of the man responsible, just a line between pain and penance. The fringe fact. In one Spanish convent, a nun gave birth to twins and insisted, under oath, that she had not known a man but dreamt of an angel. Church authorities were baffled. They eventually chalked it up to demonic interference and ordered her confined indefinitely. But they kept the twins. You begin writing your own entries in the treatise's margins, observations, addendums, not just medical notes but reflections, on love, on shame, on the way the world makes certain bodies more sacred than others. You try to do it the way Sister E did, with clarity, with courage. You sign your pages with a simple symbol, a tiny flame. One night, as you sit beside the fire with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes, Agnes asks, "Do you think we're building something real?" You look around the old chapel, at the patched roof and the soft bedrolls, the letters drying on the stones like herbs. "I think we're preserving something that already was," you say, "and maybe making something new out of it." Your world becomes small and steady. Days bleed together. Visitors come sometimes. Hunters looking for shelter. A woman from the woods who brings you mushrooms and stories. None of them stay long, but they leave behind kindness, rumours, and, once, a book of secular poetry that Agnes reads aloud by firelight, blushing through half the stanzas. It isn't paradise. There are still nights you lie awake fearing hoofbeats, still moments when you dream of the abbess's face or feel Father Leon's shadow pass too close. But here, those fears don't own you. They're just weather. Passing. Storms. Then, one morning in late spring, you find something in the garden. You were turning the earth, preparing for new plantings, when your spade hits something hard. You kneel, fingers trembling, and uncover a small wooden box. Inside, a folded linen bundle. You unwrap it gently and reveal a rosary, delicate and carved from bone, and a note. It's fragile, faded. You squint to read it. To the one who comes after, "We were here, we lived, we loved." If you find this, you're not alone. You sit back on your heels, mud clinging to your knees, tears brimming. You carry the box to Agnes. She holds it as if it's holy, and maybe it is. "They left it for us," she says. Or maybe not you, specifically, but someone like you. Women always knew how to reach across generations with thread and paper and prayer. Later that week, you create your own version. You find a dry spot beneath the chapel floor and place a sealed jar inside it. It holds one of your poems, a drawing of the garden, a tiny vial of fever root tincture, and a note written in Agnes's careful hand. It says only, "This is not the end." Scholars argue about what convent life truly looked like, about what was fiction and what was buried too deeply to recover. Some claim most nuns lived in quiet obedience, following the rule, avoiding scandal. Others believe the church's records are so censored, so rewritten, that the real lives, the complicated, messy, beautifully human parts, were scrubbed out entirely. You can't rewrite history, but you can leave breadcrumbs. You keep writing. You build an archive. Letters, drawings, poems, records of what herbs helped, which fevers, recipes, stories. You call it the sister book, not because you were ever truly sisters in the eyes of the church, but because that word, like so many others, means something different now. You even add Agnes's early poems, the ones she hid under her mattress in the convent, the ones she was too afraid to finish. She finishes them now, with ink and a calm she's earned the hard way. One morning, while copying a recipe for salve, you glance up and realise something strange. You're no longer waiting to be found. You're just living. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, that feels like enough. There's a rhythm to your days now. It's not sacred in the way the convent defined it. No bells, no 7 canonical hours, no kneeling until your knees go numb. but it is holy in its own defiant way. You wake when the sun threads through the broken panes of the refectory, your body stirred not by duty but by habit turned gentle. Agnes usually rises before you, collecting herbs from the garden, her fingers stained green and her cheeks pink from the morning chill. You watch her sometimes from the chapel steps, and you don't even try to hide the smile. Breakfast is always simple. Bread, a little cheese, maybe a handful of berries if the season's kind. You eat together in the same place where 30 women once sat in silence, chewing behind veils and mouthing psalms between bites. Now there's laughter. Not loud, but real. Sometimes you joke about calling it St Agnes's Abbey of Improper Women, and she rolls her eyes and says, "We'll need a scandalous coat of arms, maybe crossed legs over a candle flame." You start carving it, badly, into the base of the lectern just for the joy of it. You spend your mornings writing and copying. Your sister book is growing. Pages stitched together with threads scavenged from ruined linens. Some are stories, fragments of lives from women you'll never meet. Some are practical notes, what plants to steep for fever, how to pack a wound with moss and not get caught by inquisitors. Some are memories, yours, Agnes's, what she remembers of her mother's lullabies, what you remember about the taste of pomegranate seeds from your childhood before the veil. One day, while combing through the old library ruins, you find something curious. A bundle of letters tucked beneath the floorboards, barely legible, but signed with initials that stop you cold. A.M., not your Agnes, another. You sit down right there on the dust-covered floor and begin reading. These letters are explicit, blunt. They speak of nights spent in the cloister infirmary, of whispered Latin turned to moaning, of candle wax dripped, not in penitence but pleasure. You have to reread one line 3 times before it fully sinks in. She tasted like absolution, and I prayed with my tongue. You half laugh, half blush, then run to show Agnes. She reads in stunned silence, then exclaims, "She was writing nun erotica centuries before we got here." You laugh until your stomach hurts. But then, in the final letter, something shifts. The tone turns fearful. The writer talks about someone discovering the notes, of being watched, of a sister, her lover, disappearing from morning prayers without a word. The last line reads, "If they come for me next, let it be known. My sin was love, and I do not repent." You both sit still for a long time after that. Historically, letters like this did exist, though few survived intact. One set, unearthed in a Belgian convent attic in the 1800s, included confessions between 2 sisters who called each other angel and bride. The church dismissed them as spiritual metaphor, but the tone, the detail, it doesn't read like metaphors, and the fact that one of the women vanished from the convent's records not long after has never sat well with scholars. Some say she died, others say she was quietly moved. A few believe she escaped, just as you did. And here's something quirky. A handful of medieval nuns not only wrote erotica, but illustrated it, in the margins of sacred texts. Little sketches, sometimes crude, sometimes shockingly elegant, of women embracing, kissing, tangled in one another's robes. Some monasteries claim these were acts of demonic possession, or trances, but let's be honest, the art tells a different story. You add the new letters to your growing archive, wrap them in waxed cloth, copy a few of the more poetic phrases into your own journal, just for the record. Agnes writes a companion poem to the last letter, titled "I Do Not Repent." It's fierce and delicate and ends with the line, "We made a chapel out of skin and trust. Let no man unbuild it." The sister book now contains entries from nearly 20 women, some long gone, some just gone from view. You begin organising it like a real codex, cataloguing by type. Poems, letters, herbs, sins. You even start writing commentary, like a scholar. You know no one may ever read it, but then again, someone might. And if they do, they'll find more than a scandal. They'll find proof that love, real, complicated, messy love, lived here. Around the convent, spring begins to unfold. Violets creep along the walls, birds nest in the rafters. The kitchen garden bursts with stubborn life despite neglect. Agnes sings while she plants. You sketch her in the margins of a recipe for elderflower wine, captioning it, "Saint of the overripe strawberry." You still don't have real visitors. just the occasional lost traveller or wandering friar passing too far to see the cloister hidden beneath vines. But one day, something strange happens. A girl appears, maybe 16, dirt-smudged, barefoot, eyes wide. She says nothing at first, just watches from the tree line. When you approach, she bolts, but the next day she returns, and the next. On the third day, she leaves a bundle near the chapel, a small loaf of bread and a feather wrapped in cloth. You leave a note. You're safe here. Eventually she speaks. Her name is Lynette. Her family married her off at 13. She ran when her husband hit her and told the priest she burned in her belly like Eve. That's what he called it. You invite her to stay. She sleeps in the old infirmary. You make her a bed from hay and wool. She doesn't talk much, but she watches, learns, listens. You show her how to dry herbs, how to mend a torn cloak, how to write her name in clean Latin script. Agnes gives her a necklace made from an old button and string. You call her your apprentice. She grins at the word. One night she whispers, "I thought women like you were only in stories." You smile and reply, "That's what they wanted." And just like that, the quiet life expands. Becomes something less like hiding and more like building, not just for yourselves, but for whoever might need it next. You don't advertise, you don't preach. But slowly, quietly, the world begins to send them. One by one, the women find you. The first real crowd arrives with the sound of hooves. One horse, then two, then a cart rumbling slow and cautious along the overgrown road that winds to the convent gate. You and Agnes hear it at the same time and freeze. It could be pilgrims, it could be merchants, it could be trouble. You grab the knife you keep hidden in, the folds of your robe, just a kitchen blade, but your grip on it is steady. Agnes presses her back to the chapel wall and listens. Linnea is already halfway up the stairs to the bell tower, her eyes sharp, body low to the ground like she was born watching for soldiers. But when the cart rounds the corner, the tension breaks all at once. 3 women, one old, slouched and bundled in cloaks, one young and barefoot, her hair shaved at the temple, a sure sign of punishment, and one in between steering the cart, jaw set in a way that says she's had enough of everyone's nonsense. You don't say anything, you just open the gate. They don't ask for shelter, they don't weep or wail or fall to their knees, they just unload their meagre things with the practised exhaustion of women who've been on the road too long. The old one is sick, coughing in wet, rattling gasps. The young one stares at the chapel as if it might bite her. The middle one, Sister Mare you learn, was once a nun like you. Benedictines, she mutters, until they locked us up for asking why men get wine and we don't. You show them to the dormitory, lay out straw mats, light a fire, no one asks questions. That's the first rule of the house you've accidentally built. They stay, more arrive in the weeks after. A girl who fled a marriage to a man 3 times her age. A midwife accused of witch's milk when she nursed her own child. A former scribe from an abbey burned during a peasant revolt. Some come alone, some in pairs, some with babies strapped to their backs or eyes full of stories they haven't decided whether to tell yet. And the convent, this tumble-down patch of stone and ivy and candle smoke, expands to meet them. Agnes jokes about needing a charter. You half joke about needing armed guards. You build beds, teach them to mix herbs, how to clean wounds, how to write. You train them to memorise alternate names, alternate pasts. One day, Lynette produces a new set of habits she's been sewing from old drapery and stolen wool. They're rough but serviceable. She models one and declares herself Mother Abbess of St Lost Causes. Everyone cheers. And now it's not just survival, it's community. You revise the sister book again, add sections. Not just stories now, but teachings. How to identify a dangerous priest by the way he questions your devotion. How to hide letters under floorboards. How to make ink from soot and egg white. How to fake a miscarriage with certain herbs. How to forge a transfer letter from one convent to another. You don't even bother pretending it's not subversive anymore. That's the point. One day, a merchant woman from a nearby town, one who's been quietly passing supplies through a forgotten debt system, shows up with something odd. A bottle of imported ink and a stack of vellum. Real vellum. "Heard you were building something," she says. "Thought you might want it to last." Agnes nearly, cries you use it to make the formal version. The book, bound in leather, gilded in places, beautiful in the way heretical things sometimes are. You keep the original pages, of course, smudged and uneven and sacred in their imperfection. But now you have a true record, a legacy. Sometimes you take turns reading aloud from it, especially the oldest letters, the ones that prove you weren't the first, that this all happened before, and it might happen again. Historically, nothing like your convent would have been permitted under church law. Unauthorized gatherings of women were seen as dangerous, rebellious, heretical. There are records of such communities being raided, their members dragged back into monastic submission, or worse. But they also existed, in the cracks, in the forests, in places so remote the church didn't bother unless rumours grew too loud. Some scholars call them shadow convents. Some think they're myth. You'd say the truth probably lived somewhere in between, quietly, carefully, with dirt under its fingernails. Here's one of those strange, real things. A letter from a bishop in 1294 complains of a colony of disobedient women keeping chapel in the ruins of St Mercia. He demands they be removed. There's no follow-up, no response, just silence. Either they vanished, or made it so no one could find them again. You choose to believe it was the second. There's one night in early summer when the whole convent, such as it is now, sits outside under the stars. Someone has brought wine questionably blessed. There's bread, a little cheese, laughter. Agnes plays a tune on a pipe someone carved from alderwood. Lynette dances badly. Sister Mare recites poetry so filthy it nearly stops your heart. The youngest girl, barely 12, falls asleep on your shoulder, thumb in mouth, content. Agnes leans over and murmurs, "Is this what you imagined when you took your vows?" You chuckle. "I didn't know what to imagine. I just wanted to belong somewhere." She kisses your temple. You do. You sit there long into the night, watching the stars, listening to the quiet that only comes when women feel safe. But safety is never permanent. One morning a note appears under the chapel door. Slipped in, no wax seal, just folded linen paper. It reads, "They know. He's coming. Burn the names. No signature. You don't ask who he is. You already know. Father Leon. Of course it's him." Agnes finds you standing in the scriptorium with the letter trembling in your hand. She doesn't speak, just wraps her arms around you, her cheek against your back. You feel her breath, even and calm. "We'll decide what to save," you whisper. "Then we'll decide what to fight for," she answers. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the fire in your belly burns hotter than your fear. You don't sleep that night. Neither does anyone else. The convent, your haven, your improbable sanctuary built from crumbling stone and outlawed love, hums with silent preparation. No panic, no chaos, just a kind of collective breath held at the base of every throat. It's like everyone's been waiting for this moment without saying it aloud. Because of course it would come. Safety, for women like you, is always temporary. Agnes starts organising immediately. "We need to protect the sister book," she says, pulling it from the shelf in its waxed wrap. Her fingers are gentle but decisive. "If they take this, they erase everything," you nod. "Not just our stories, all the sisters." So you make a plan. You copy the book again, just key pieces, the names, the letters, the how-to sections, the most essential entries. Agnes hides that copy in a stone niche beneath the altar, sealed in wax leather and tucked behind a loose brick. You spend an hour carving a tiny mark into the wall above it, barely noticeable unless you know where to look. Lynette watches from the doorway, her arms full of cloaks and dried apples. "We'll scatter what we can't carry," she says, like it's obvious. 1 page per hollow tree, 1 scroll for every midwife and widow with eyes sharp enough to read between lines. Sister Mare sharpens a blade with a grim smile. "If he comes here expecting lambs, he'll find wolves instead." You don't disagree. But you're not soldiers. You're not trained in war. You're just women with bruised histories, ink-stained hands, and a deep bone-level refusal to be erased again. And still, there's fear. Beneath the defiance, it coils. You think about what Father Leon did back in the convent, how he used silence and suggestion like weapons. You remember the way his hand rested just a second too long. You remember the smirk when he said, "I know, and now he's coming here, for you." Historically, church authorities like Father Leon operated with near absolute power, especially in matters of morality and internal discipline. There was no jury, no defence, just accusations, penance, or punishment. And when a scandal threatened public order, or the church's reputation, Swift, quiet action was preferred. Nuns could be transferred, silenced, re-educated, or in the most extreme cases, imprisoned or executed. Records often list such removals in vague terms: relocated for spiritual cleansing, retired to silence, passed into grace. Some were never mentioned again. But here's the fringe fact that gives you hope. During the 14th century, there's evidence that some groups of women, so-called begins, lay religious women who lived communally outside formal convent structures, formed networks across Europe. They offered each other aid, smuggled books, passed messages. They were feared by the church for being both spiritual and independent. Many were hunted down or absorbed into sanctioned convents, but not all. Some simply disappeared, and maybe, just maybe, became legends whispered behind locked doors. You want to be one of those? So you prepare. Everyone in the house has a role. Linny scouts the road from the bell tower watching for riders. Sister Mare sets traps around the forest trail, nothing deadly, just enough to confuse and delay. Agnes teaches the others how to hide in the cellar maze beneath the kitchen, a leftover from the convent's wine storage days. You scatter caches of food, water and herbs. You leave behind candles and flint in the corners. You map every escape route. And in the quiet moments, when you dare, you say goodbye to the rooms. The scriptorium, where you first copied a love poem in trembling hand. The refectory, where laughter replaced psalms. The dormitory, where your body first felt like it belonged to you. You kiss each wall with your palm, like a mother tucking her child in for the last time. The morning he arrives is beautiful. Of course it is. The sun rises pink and gold over the trees. Birds chirp like they've never heard of church law. The air smells of lilac and moss. You're sitting with Agnes in the courtyard, pretending you're not waiting for hoofbeats. Lynette whistles twice from the bell tower. They've seen him. One rider, black cloak, no banner, no escort. But it's him. You feel it. Agnes stands, straightens her shoulders. We face him together. You meet him at the gate. He's aged, but not softened. His eyes are hard, mouth thin with purpose. He greets you like nothing happened, like he didn't nearly destroy you in that convent cell years ago with a word and a smile. "Sisters," he says, "you've strayed." You say nothing. He steps inside without permission. His gaze drifts over the garden, the walls, the soft repairs and signs of life. He sees women gathering, quiet but present. His lip curls. "This is heresy," he says, gesturing at the chapel. "A false convent, an offence against order," you shrug. "So was the original church once." He doesn't like that. He demands you come with him. "Back to the fold," he says. "You can repent. You can be restored." Agnes moves beside you. "We were never broken." He steps forward, voice rising. "You've corrupted others. You've copied forbidden texts. You've fostered unnatural relations." You feel your hands ball into fists. "We've built a place where no woman is prey," you reply. "You've built a prison of sin." You glance back at the chapel. It feels more like home. He demands to see the books. You refuse. He threatens to return with soldiers, with excommunication writs, with the bishop himself. You meet his stare. "Then come, but you'll find no one here." And you're right, because even as you speak the plan is in motion. The youngest girls are already on the forest paths. Linetta's led half the women to the midwife's house beyond the ridge. Sister Mare waits with horses in the stables hidden beneath thatch. You give Agnes a look. She nods. And then, with a single signal, you leave him standing in the courtyard. He doesn't chase you. He calls after you instead. "You'll burn for this." You don't turn around, because you're already halfway through the woods, walking the escape paths you dug with your own hands, toward the temporary safe house hidden near the creek bed. You left behind nothing he can use, no names, no full books, no sisters, and yet you also left a gift. Under his feet, beneath the flagstone at the altar, you buried a single page in a sealed jar. On it, the names of every woman who ever passed through your walls, not in confession, not in shame, in celebration. So even if he raises it all, even if the stones fall and the vines reclaim the walls, the story stays. And maybe, years from now, another woman will dig through the ruins and find the jar, read the names, add her own, and carry the story forward. You keep walking even when your legs protest, even when the forest thickens and the mud tugs at your soles like some jealous ghost trying to pull you backward. The women behind you are quiet, their breathing loud in the stillness. A few are crying, softly like birds, but most walk with grim determination. You don't stop to comfort them. You can't. Not yet. Not until you're sure he didn't follow, that his voice and his threat stayed behind with the broken gate and the cracked altar stone. The path you take is one you've walked in your head 100 times. Through the moss tunnel near the creek, past the boulder that looks like a crouched lion, and then up the ridge into the hollow where the forest grows so dense it forgets sunlight. Agnes leads part of the group behind you, her eyes always flicking behind, counting heads. Linus moves like she's been training for this her whole life, pointing out fresh tracks, testing leaves for tampering, her hands always near the dagger she keeps tucked in her sash. You wonder sometimes what she would have become if the world hadn't tried so hard to ruin her first. You reach the safe house at dusk, a low, sunken structure, half collapsed, long abandoned by whatever woodsman or healer last lived here. You claimed it months ago, sweeping the ash from the hearth and patching holes with thatch and cloth, just in case this moment ever came. You never actually believed you'd need it. Funny how that works. Inside, the air smells like damp stone and cedar. You light the hidden candles, lay down blankets, pass around the dried apples, the hard bread, the wine you stashed in wax-sealed jars beneath the floorboards. The women settle slowly, huddling in 2s and 3s like deer after a thunderstorm. You speak little. No one wants to break the quiet yet. It feels sacred, like the pause before prayer or battle. You stay up with Agnes. She stares into the fire, her knees drawn to her chest. "He'll come back," she says, not as a question. You nod, and we won't be there. You didn't just flee, you dismantled. Every document that named a sister was burned or buried. The most dangerous pages, anything with real names, real places, are ash now, mixed with the soil where your garden used to grow. Even the sister book was split apart. The original pages are in 5 different bundles, handed off to women along your route. One is with Lynette, one you buried beneath a stone marked with a cross tilted 45 degrees. The others, you didn't even keep track. That's part of the plan. Even you can't give them all away under torture. Historically, people assume medieval women had no idea how to resist, that they were too pious, too obedient, too afraid. But there are records, scattered, fragmented, that suggest otherwise. During the early 14th century, there were entire convents that practiced quiet defiance, refusing papal inspections, smuggling in banned texts. One group in the Low Countries even built escape tunnels beneath their chapel, hand-dug with spoons and kitchen knives. Archaeologists only found them when a section collapsed in the 1980s. The tunnels led straight to the village well. No one knows how many sisters used them. Your version isn't a tunnel. It's a network. Women who help women. Midwives, widows, washerwomen, tavern keepers and horse traders who ask no questions. A butcher's daughter in one town. A laundress in another. Miller, of course, who sent word weeks ago that the roads were no longer safe. She'd heard the church was looking again. And now you know why. You fall asleep leaning against Agnes's shoulder. Her breath is warm on your cheek, her arm around your waist like a cord pulled tight. When you wake, she's still there, watching the window. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the sky is pale. You whisper, "Do we build again?" Agnes hesitates. "Do we dare?" And then Lynette pipes up from across the room, blanket over her head. "Of course we do. You think we went through all that just to hide again?" "No, thank you." And that's that. The next day, you send scouts. Mayor takes a small group north, toward a rumoured safe hamlet near the coast. Linne heads south to re-establish contact with a friend who smuggles grain. You and Agnes take the rest, 12 women in all, and start walking west. Toward what, you're not sure. But the forest is full of possibilities. After a week you find a ruin, an old house, stone-walled, covered in ivy, far from any road. Roof's mostly gone, but the bones are solid. You clear the brush, patch the holes, build fires in the hearths. You carve a new cross into the threshold. This one not upright, but sideways. A symbol only the right eyes would understand. You begin again. You call it the Hollow House. This time, you don't try to recreate a convent. No habits, no bells, no vows unless someone wants to take them. You let the place become what it wants to be. A refuge, a stop along the road, a quiet resistance. You teach what you know. Writing, healing, hiding, storytelling. Agnes holds a poetry circle, every 7th night. The rules are simple. Write something, read something, say what you couldn't say before, and slowly, New pages form. The sister book grows again, this time with drawings, maps, instructions for escape routes, lyrics to songs that no one outside your group knows. You even start keeping a bestiary, half serious, half satirical, of dangerous beasts. Entry 1. Patriarchus clericus, often found lurking near pulpits and girls' dormitories, weak to direct eye contact and sarcasm. You joke more now, it's how you survive, and you love more too. Openly, carefully, but without shame. You and Agnes sleep curled together on a mattress of moss and wool. You touch freely. You kiss without looking over your shoulder. One night you sit beside the fire and read aloud from an old page, one of the letters you copied years ago, the one that ends, "Let it be known. My sin was love, and I do not repent." Everyone's silent for a moment. Then one voice whispers, "Amen." You don't know if this will last, if another man like Leon will come, if the church will ever truly stop hunting women like you. But for now, you've done what your foremothers only dreamed of. You've made a world where your love isn't a secret, where your story isn't a sin, where your survival isn't the end of the tale, but the beginning of one. The hollow house, despite the name, fills quickly, with life, with noise, with the steady pulse of women deciding they are not done yet. You rebuild the roof with help from a mason's daughter, who shows up one morning with a mule, a hammer, and a 5-word explanation. "He hit me. I left." You teach her to mix lime and thatch. She teaches you how to swing a hammer without splitting your thumb. You don't ask more. You don't need to. Everyone who arrives has a story. You just wait until they're ready to tell it. The kitchen becomes the heart of the house. Not because of the food, though you do manage to make a decent onion stew, but because it's where the laughter happens. Where women swap stories while peeling root vegetables or boiling water. Where gossip filters in from the road. Where Sister Mare grumbles about the firewood like it personally offended her. Where Lynette, still scrawny and sharp-tongued, hosts lessons on how to spot a church informant by the way they butter bread. Too neat. Always too neat. The house is safer now, but no one pretends it's a sanctuary untouched by risk. You've all earned your scars. You keep your escape plans written, memorised, updated monthly. There are whistles tucked into hems, ropes knotted into the back walls, knives hidden under floorboards and behind the hearth. You've become your own militia of quiet resistance. Less swords, more sewing needles and coded letters. And still, amid all the watchfulness, there's joy. Real joy. Like the night Agnes paints your names on the chapel wall. Not your old ones. Not the ones your families gave. You, but the ones you chose. The names you whisper in bed. The names no priest ever said over a font or a deathbed. You write them in red ochre side by side beneath a carving of 2 clasped hands. Below it you inscribe, "Sisters by fire, not by fear." The hollow house begins attracting more than runaways. Messengers, traders, women in cloistered marriage looking for a night of silence, or a night of something else. They bring news, letters, sometimes warnings, occasionally food. More often than not, just stories. One day a rider brings a letter bound in wax-stiffened cloth. The seal's long broken, the parchment creased with travel. Inside, a note in careful Latin. To the women of the hollow house, I do not know your names, but I know your courage. I was once like you. I escaped the walls and the shame. I did not die in sin. I lived in truth. Keep going. You are not alone. Sister E. Agnes looks up from the page, stunned. The Sister E? You nod slowly. She made it. And somehow, that's everything. Historically, most of these women never left records. Their names were erased, their lives folded into rumours, but a few survive in fragments. Anonymous scribes, herbalists, accused heretics whose confessions slipped through the cracks. Women who defied without drawing swords, just by refusing to vanish. Some scholars say these pockets of resistance weren't organised, weren't connected. But maybe they just didn't know what to look for. Maybe they missed the symbols, the tilted cross, the way letters were folded, the lines of poetry hidden inside recipes. Maybe the world was always full of these houses, quietly burning in the forest, flickering in and out of view like fireflies that refuse to go out. One of your new sisters, Elsbeth, brings a strange gift. A book she found buried in a collapsed well near an old priory. It's damaged by water, ink bled to near illegibility, but the drawings survive. Women with their arms wrapped around one another, a garden shaped like a circle, paths spiralling inward. At the centre, 2 figures under a tree. One is kissing the other's hand. At the bottom of the page, a phrase, Amica mea mihi et ego illi. My beloved is mine, and I am hers. You copy the illustration into the sister book, careful lines of ink traced with reverence. Agnes adds a page explaining the symbol's new use. When drawn onto a wall, it marks a place of safety for women. Not a convent, not a church, just a haven. And slowly you begin to mark those places yourselves. A farmhouse in the eastern hills, a barn near a river bend, a crumbling monastery where the monks are long gone, but the library remains. You travel by night, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone, carving that symbol where it won't be noticed by the wrong eyes. Agnes calls it the fire ring. Linnet calls it the mark of women who survived. Whatever it is, it spreads. One night, as you sit by the hearth, Agnes turns to you and asks, "What would we be if we hadn't been sent to the convent?" It's a question that unspools slowly. You think of all the other lives you might have lived. A scholar, a midwife, a traveller, a woman with a wife and a farm and no reason to run. You think of the path your family chose for you, cloistered walls and iron vows, and then you think of this path, this improbable miracle of ruin and fire and ink. You answer, I'd still be here, with you, even if the path was different. Agnes leans against your shoulder and says, then it was worth it. Not all the women who come through Hollow House stay. Some just pass through, on their way to elsewhere. Some stay a night, some a year. You teach them what you know. They add to the book, and when they leave, you send them with a copy of the mark and a promise. You are not alone. One of them, a young woman named Therin, leaves behind a note in the chapel. I came here afraid. I leave with fire in my mouth. Thank you for giving me back my voice. Another, older, a widow with silver hair, simply writes, you gave me my name back. There are bad days, of course. Days where you lose someone. Days when the grief sneaks in like a frost overnight, curling around your bones. Days when someone tells a story that echoes too close to your own, and your chest knots so tight you can't speak. But even then, you're not alone. The fire never goes out. You're not nuns anymore, not really. You've outgrown the wimple and the vow and the submission. You're not saints either. You curse, you laugh, you make mistakes. But you are something else. Keepers, witnesses, daughters of every woman who ever dared to love out loud. The day you find the manuscript, the sky's doing that soft grey thing. Low clouds stretching over the trees like a blanket. The kind of weather that makes you want to wrap yourself in wool and read for hours. You're in what used to be a chicken coop of all places. It's been converted into a storage shed, but it still smells faintly of feathers and old hay. You were just looking for a spool of thread. Instead, you find a hidden compartment beneath a loose board in the floor. The wood shifts oddly under your foot, and when you pry it up, there it is. A bundle of pages bound with twine, wrapped in oilcloth to keep out the rot. You carry it inside like treasure. Agnes is peeling root vegetables by the hearth. When you lay it out on the table, she raises an eyebrow. You found the Ark of the Covenant in the chicken coop? Maybe something better, you say. It's a manuscript, handmade, unfinished, Latin mostly, but written in a woman's hand, you can tell by the lettering. Precise, elegant, with flourishes no monk would bother with. It's not religious, not remotely. The first line you translate reads, "The knight knelt before her habit and begged permission to sin." You both stare at each other for a beat of stunned silence. Agnes drops the turnip. You read aloud, slowly, each line more. Scandalous than the last. There's a nun. There's a knight. There's a convent cellar and an impressive misuse of a relic thurible. It's not just erotic, it's inventive. Blushworthy in places. Honestly poetic in others. It reads like someone who knew exactly what they were writing and didn't care if God was listening. Agnes is beaming. It's nun fan fiction. You're wheezing by the second chapter, when a clever abbess seduces the knight's bride and tells her she's been fasting for that kind of body. It's absolutely unhinged, and absolutely brilliant. You read it twice, then 3 times. Then you transcribe the entire thing in fresh ink because it deserves to be preserved. You ask the older sisters if they've heard of it. Sister Mare cackles so hard she nearly tips over a pot of boiling onions. "Oh, that," she says. That's the candle and the sword. It's famous. Famous, she waves a hand. Only in certain convents. We had a copy hidden in the infirmary cupboard. Abbess used to read it out loud on feast days after too much wine. You're stunned. Who wrote it? No one knows. The rumour was that it started in Flanders, or Italy. Or maybe it was passed between convents like a chain letter. Everyone added their own chapter. That's why some of it's in verse. You flip through the last few pages. Sure enough, there's a section written in rhymed couplets. Terrible, glorious rhymed couplets. She prayed with lips both soft and red, and laid her nunhood in his bed. You lose composure. But beyond the laughter, beyond the sheer audacity of the text, there's something deeply comforting about it. Here, in the margins of a life meant to be cloistered and chaste, someone, or many someones, had carved out a little world where nuns got to be bold, sensual, curious, free. It was literature's rebellion. You'd never seen it before, but you recognise the impulse. You add it to the sister book, of course, not the full copy, you're still deciding whether it qualifies as sacred, but a section. You title it A Brief History of Holy Indecency. You include an excerpt and a note. Let it be known that even within stone walls, stories find ways to slip out under the door. Historically, there were indeed manuscripts like this, though rarely preserved in full. Erotic or satirical texts written by and for women in convents are sometimes dismissed as jests, but they survive. One fragment from the 14th century Italy contains a poetic exchange between two sisters comparing their lovers, one real, one imaginary, using increasingly outlandish metaphors involving rosary beads and fishhooks. Scholars have argued over the seriousness of these works, but the consensus now leans toward this. They were playful, yes, but also intentional. These women weren't just bored. They were expressing a world the Church had no space for. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about authorship. Did nuns really write these? Or were they mocking forgeries by male clerics? Some insist that the intimacy, the detail, the coded phrasing point to female authorship. Others claim it's wishful thinking. But here's what matters to you. Whoever wrote it knew. They knew the cloister, the language, the desire. They weren't guessing, and that means you're not alone. Inspired, you and Agnes begin writing your own stories. Not quite erotica, but not exactly chaste either. Fiction, poetry, little dialogues between imaginary sisters across the centuries. You slip them into the folds of the sister book. Linnae finds one and gasps so loud you think she's hurt. You wrote this? She asks, mouth agape. You put the abbess in the lap of the Virgin Mary, Agnes grins. Symbolism. Sister Mare claps her hands. We're going to have to add a library wing. Word spreads. Soon others are contributing. You set up a wooden box labelled Confessions of the Imaginative Variety. By the end of the month it's overflowing. Stories range from sweet to salacious, from tragic to hilarious. One is about a nun who runs away with a witch and turns the bishop into a goat. Another is a love letter written entirely in metaphors involving bread. The house is louder now, joyful. Women whisper about characters like their neighbours. You hold weekly readings. It becomes a tradition. Stories by candlelight, warm soup, shared blankets. The Hollow House becomes not just a refuge, but a publishing haven. A secret library of voices the world tried to silence. And somehow, even amid all this, the fire of vigilance never fades. You stay alert, watch the woods, rotate lookouts, because you know that laughter and freedom are the most dangerous things a woman can hold. But you also know you're done living in fear. One night, as you're packing a scroll for a woman set to deliver it to another safe house, you pause and write a short dedication on the first page, for the women who came before, who dreamed in silence, and for the women who come after, who will dream aloud. Then you tie the scroll with red thread, like the old days, and send it into the world. Because stories, especially the forbidden ones, were never meant to stay hidden. They were meant to survive. You start hearing her name long before you find her words, whispers carried by travellers, messages tucked in loaves of bread, a poem recited from memory by a breathless runaway. The sky is not a ceiling, but a veil, and I have kissed the moon through it. The author, Sister Aurelia, sometimes called Saint Aurelia of the Smoke, though no church has canonised her. According to rumour, she was a nun who fled her abbey after setting fire to the archives, taking nothing but her quill, her inkpot, and a red ribbon tied around her wrist. You don't know if any of that's true, but the image is irresistible. It takes months before a letter reaches you with actual pages attached. They're old, yellowed at the edges, and carefully copied by someone else, someone who writes, found in a satchel near the riverbank. Thought you'd want them. Inside are 6 pages of verse, each one more electric than the last. There's theology in them, sure, but also blood and skin and women who speak of devotion with mouths that taste of wine and regret. Agnes reads them aloud, voice soft, reverent. She touched me like the wind touches fire, not gently, but as if to test whether I would burn or bend. You sit in stunned silence when she finishes. It's not just beautiful, it's true, not literally. You don't think Sister Aurelia is writing confession exactly, but she's writing something even more dangerous, possibility. That in the worst place, in the most confined life, a woman could still make art that burned with love and rage and clarity. You start searching, asking, digging. Turns out fragments of her writing exist across the region. One nun-turned-midwife swears she saw a full book of Aurelia's poetry in a merchant's house in Ghent. A travelling healer claims she helped hide the sister herself years ago, though she can't remember the name of the village. You collect every clue, every partial verse, building a picture not just of the poet, but of the path her words have taken, like dandelion seeds caught on the wind, never quite landing in one place for long. Historically, this isn't all that surprising. The medieval world, especially among religious women, was full of hidden authors. Some wrote under their real names, others used initials, symbols, or nothing at all. Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Hrotsvitha of Gandersheim, names we know only because someone thought to write them down. But for every named mystic or theologian, there were dozens more whose voices were scrubbed from history by the simple fact of their gender. Their works were attributed to men, or left to rot in forgotten chests. The scholarly debate around Sister Aurelia is ongoing. Well, assuming you count 3 independent scribes and an ex-abbess who swears she saw Aurelia's handwriting in a psalter now locked in a private Jesuit collection. Some argue she never existed at all. Others say she was several women, stitched together by rumour and repetition. But you believe in her. Because even if she never lived as one woman, she's real. Because women like her had to exist, even if the world didn't let them leave their names behind. Agnes starts calling her our patron saint of passionate nonsense. You start carving a tiny letter A into the spine of the sister book, just beside the entries you think she would have loved most. Poems, love letters, jokes, recipes for soup with way too much garlic. One evening, you even add a page titled If Aurelia Had a Kitchen. It includes imaginary meals like wine-braised heretics and sin-sweet plum jam. It's not high literature, but it makes everyone laugh. Then something stranger happens. The girl arrives, alone, maybe 17, with soot on her hands and a scroll tied to her back. She doesn't speak at first, just hands you the scroll and sits down by the fire like she belongs there. The scroll is sealed with wax in the shape of a rose. Inside, 15 pages of verse, and at the bottom, a signature, S. A. Agnes Stairs. Number, it can't be. You read the first lines aloud. I never meant to be holy, I only meant to survive, and in surviving found divinity in the curve of her mouth. You don't know if it's the same Aurelia, if the girl brought her own poems or someone else's, but it doesn't matter, because the words feel like a rope, tossed across time and space, pulling you forward. That night you create a new ritual. Every full moon you gather in the chapel, or what passes for one these days, and read from the collected verses of Sister Aurelia. You light candles, drink wine. Someone always reads the Kissing the Moon poem. It's mandatory now. You call it the Night of Smoke. And over time it becomes more than just tradition. It becomes a form of worship, not of a saint or a god, but of language, of survival, of the women who keep daring to write. You find new fragments too. A verse stitched into a hem, a prayer scrawled on a bark strip and buried beneath a shrine, a song hummed by a woman who claims to have no memory of where she learned it. You begin to believe that maybe Aurelia didn't write all of these, but her name is a container now, a place to hold all the voices that weren't allowed to echo. And here's your favourite fringe fact. In one obscure abbey record from the 14th century, a monk complains that several nuns are spending too much time with books of uncertain origin and singing rhymes that have no basis in scripture. The report ends with the sentence, one of them signed a parchment with only the letter A and a drawing of a flame. He considered it blasphemy. You consider it confirmation. You begin compiling the Aurelia Codex, a separate collection within the sister book, reserved for the wild, the lyrical, the unabashedly messy. You leave blank pages at the end so future hands can keep writing. You imagine some far-off woman adding her verse centuries from now, smiling at the fire ring etched on the inside cover, knowing someone once made space for her words. Agnes crafts a medallion. It's small, clay, fired in the hearth, a rose pressed into one side, a flame on the other. You wear it around your neck like a relic. Linus paints Aurelia's words above the hearth. Let my life be an unfinished sentence, written by every woman who dares to love. The others add their favourite lines, turning the walls of Hollow House into a living poem. One day, when you're older, when your hands tremble too much to write clearly and your hair is streaked with silver, a new girl will ask you, did she really exist? And you'll smile and say, she does now. The Hollow House never promises peace. It gives you shelter, firelight, stories, but not rest. Not really. You still wake in the middle of the night sometimes, your heartbeat louder than the wind through the broken shutters, some ancient fear pulling you up from dreams where cloisters collapse or hands reach for you in the dark. But tonight it's not fear that wakes you, it's noise. You sit up slowly. Agnes shifts beside you, murmuring in her sleep but not waking. The fires burned low, casting flickering shadows across the stone floor. And there it is again, a strange rhythmic sound coming from outside. Not footsteps, not hooves. Something lighter, almost scratching. You slip out from under the covers and pad barefoot to the door. The wind smells like damp moss and something faintly metallic. You step out into the courtyard and pause. The moon is high, silvering the world in light. Everything looks normal until you turn your head and see her, the fox. She's perched on the edge of the garden wall, fur sleek, tail curled over her feet like a lady in church. Her eyes gleam gold. She stares directly at you, unblinking. You're not afraid. Not exactly. You know how to fear predators. This doesn't feel like that. This feels familiar. And then she makes a sound, half bark, half yawn, and bounds down into the yard, trotting toward the door of the chapel as though she owns it. You follow. Of course you do. What else is there to do, really, when a fox invites you somewhere? Inside the chapel, the fox stops, looks back at you, then noses a corner of the altar. There's nothing there at first, just dust and old stone. But when you kneel and push aside a broken tile, you find something buried, wrapped in wax cloth, small. You open it slowly, heart thudding. It's a bone, carved, smooth, an amulet maybe, roughly shaped like a woman's face, or maybe an owl depending on the light, and beneath it, a scrap of parchment. Just one word, smeared but legible. Remember. You sit back hard on the floor, breath sharp. When you look up, the fox is gone. Historically, animals appear in convent records more often than you'd expect. Cats were common, of course, practical pest control, but also birds, dogs, even deer. There are stories of nuns forming strange bonds with them, naming them after saints, feeding them from the convent table. One abbess in the 12th century wrote that her dove, Clotilde, sang the psalms sweeter than any novice. There are no formal records of foxes living in convents, but a poem from the 13th century references a sister with fur for a shadow. And here's the quirky part. Some historians think these stories were coded, that the animals represented outsiders, lovers, or even hidden versions of the nuns themselves, wildness cloaked in metaphor. You don't tell anyone about the fox right away, not because you think they'll mock you, but because it feels personal, sacred, like some part of the house itself reached out and placed something in your hands. You slip the bone carving into your pocket. The parchment goes into the sister book, tucked between a poem and a map of the known fire rings. You write beneath it. She came with moonlight on her back and left silence in her place. Agnes finds it later and doesn't even ask. She just touches your shoulder and says, "You see them too, don't you?" And then she tells you about the cat that visited her during her worst fever, curled up beside her, purring like a heartbeat. No one else saw it. But after that she got better. You start asking the others. They all have stories. Elsbeth, the widow, says she once dreamed of a bird made entirely of mist that flew into her room and carried off her shame. Linnet claims she's been followed by a crow since she was 12. It sometimes leaves her little gifts, acorns, bits of string, the edge of a book page. She keeps them in a box beneath her bed. And so the bestiary begins. Not a joke this time, not satire, a real collection. You start compiling the stories in a new book, the Book of Strange Companions. Each page is illustrated crudely at first, then more skillfully as a travelling illuminator joins your ranks. Her name is Isolde. She fled a guild after her father tried to marry her off in exchange for debt relief. She's quiet, but her drawings are alive. She captures the eyes of Linnet's crow with uncanny detail, the fox's tail, Agnes's fever cat. The entries grow. A rabbit who led a lost girl back to the forest path. A dog who barked only at liars. A spider who wove Latin letters into her web. A white stag seen by two sisters the night before their escape. You know the church wouldn't approve. Animal symbolism is dangerous. The line between miracle and heresy is too thin. But you're not writing for the church anymore. You're writing for each other. For the moments that can't be explained but beg to be recorded. One afternoon, a woman named Frima arrives. She doesn't speak at first, just places a small cage on the table and opens it. A squirrel hops out and immediately climbs onto her shoulder, chittering softly. Frima pats its head and says, "This is Elmo. He's kept me sane." No one laughs. You simply add another page to the book, and beneath it, you begin writing a truth you hadn't realised until now. When no one else was allowed to love us, something still did. The Book of Strange Companions becomes its own kind of gospel. Women gather at night to read aloud from it, just like they do with poetry and stories. Agnes begins adding tiny invocations in the margins: St Fox, protector of secrets; Lady Cat, keeper of sleep and slow healing; Mother Crow, who sees what others don't and tells no one. There are arguments about whether you should be calling them saints. Sister Mare insists it's blasphemy, then writes her own entry under the title Blessed Goat of Screaming Judgments. No one stops her. Over time, the book evolves. It's not just about the animals anymore. It's about the women they saved, the ones who survived because something small and living reminded them they were still part of the world, that they weren't ghosts yet. And maybe, just maybe, the creatures weren't ever animals at all. Maybe they were messengers, spirits, guardians sent not by heaven or hell, but by the universe's quiet refusal to let you disappear. You place the Book of Strange Companions next to the sister book on the shelf in the Hollow House library. Side by side, history and myth, truth and tenderness, neither complete without the other. And when you pass by it at night, you sometimes feel eyes watching you from the rafters or the garden wall. You never find the fox again, but then again, you never look too hard. Some companions are meant to be remembered, not held. The letter arrives curled like a fern frond, sealed in red wax stamped with an insignia none of you recognise. It's not handed over by a breathless courier or smuggled inside a crust of bread. No, it's just sitting on the chapel threshold at dawn, as if placed there by invisible hands in the night. Linnet finds it, of course, she always does, and brings it to you wrapped in a cloth, eyes narrowed like the parchment might explode. Agnes takes one look at the seal and mutters, "That's not good." You agree. It's too clean, too official. Whoever sent it didn't want to be stealthy. They wanted to be seen. That's worse. You unroll the letter slowly. The script is elegant, formal, and unmistakably church-approved. It begins with your current favourite phrase, "to whom it may concern." You skim the page, your mouth tightening with each sentence. Agnes reads over your shoulder. By the time you reach the bottom, she's swearing softly. The message is simple, condemning, final. You've been observed. Your refuge has been described to the office of the papal curia in Avignon. You are hereby ordered to disband your community, surrender your written materials, and present yourself for penance under the guidance of the Bishop of Rouen. If you fail to comply, your name shall be placed on the register of anathema, and any who assist you will be likewise condemned. You fold the letter with care, as if rough hands might summon flames. Then you place it in the fire and watch the parchment curl, blacken, and disappear. Agnes doesn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "Well, I suppose we're famous." Historically, papal involvement in monastic discipline wasn't rare. but usually it involved financial corruption, unorthodox teachings, or open disobedience of church hierarchy. For a refuge like yours to be formally acknowledged by the Curia, that meant someone had been paying attention. It meant your little house, your little library, your little firing network had grown loud enough to echo through marble halls. A problem big enough to name. And here's a fringe detail. In the late 13th century, a group of Beguines in France were targeted by church authorities not because of anything they wrote or said, but simply because they refused to dissolve. They weren't heretical, they weren't disruptive, they were just too self-sufficient, and that was enough to be dangerous. You call a meeting that night. Everyone gathers in the old dining hall, firelight flickering on the stone walls now inked with poetry and foxpaws. You read the letter aloud, slowly, so no one misses a word. When you finish, silence falls. Not fear, just a kind of stillness. Everyone is waiting to see who speaks first. It's Lynette. "So," she says, leaning back in her chair, "do we burn it all and run?" Someone laughs. Someone else says, "I just finished painting the walls." And then Sister Mare, who's been silent, staring into the fire with that look she gets when she's turning over bad memories like stones, speaks. "No," she says, "not this time." You glance at her. "You think we stay?" She nods. "I'm tired of running. If they're watching, let them watch. Let them see exactly what it is they're trying to destroy." The room shifts. You can feel it, the resolve rising, quiet and slow but unmistakable. Agnes speaks next. "We've built something here, not perfect, but ours. If they want it, they'll have to come take it, and they'll regret it. You remember the first time you ran, how your hands trembled trying to pack a bag by candlelight. You remember the fear, but this time you feel something different, anger, but also clarity. The next day you begin preparations. You don't scatter, you fortify. You organise the books, hide some, copy others. You make decoys, false journals filled with nothing but hymns and drawings of vegetables. You set up a watch schedule. You reinforce the cellar. The older sisters craft smoke bombs using dried herbs and lamp oil. You all practice evacuation drills just in case, and you write. Every woman in the house begins writing letters, not for defence, not for the church, for memory, testimonies, histories, declarations. One letter reads, "We loved, we learned, we built nothing the world offered us and everything we needed." Another, "You say we have sinned. I say you have never knelt beside a woman who's finally sleeping without fear." Agnes writes something that makes you cry. "They tried to make me holy by erasing me. I became holy by surviving long enough to write this." You add it all to the sister book. Pages swelling now. The bindings reinforced with waxed thread. The margins scrawled with more names, more symbols. You even make backup copies, just in case this becomes a story that someone else must finish. But still, no one comes. Days pass, then weeks. The silence becomes suspicious. Until, one morning, a rider approaches. Not in armour, not with parchment, but with something far stranger. A package. Left at the edge of the woods, tied in twine. Lynette retrieves it. You untie, the cloth slowly. Inside, a book. Church binding, vellum, gold leaf. But inside, it's yours. Pages from the sister book. Drawings from the bestiary. A poem signed with your name, one you wrote months ago and tucked inside a bundle bound for a safe house. A note is tucked into the spine. "We see you. Not all of us agree. Keep going. No signature, just the faintest mark. The fire ring. And with that, you understand. You're not the only ones watching. Someone within the church, maybe a scribe, maybe a scholar, maybe a nun buried deep within the machinery knows. They don't have the power to protect you openly. But they sent you this. A warning. A gift. A sign." You gather everyone that night and read the poem aloud. Then you raise a glass, not in fear, but in defiance. "They want us silent," you say. "But we've already spoken." And Agnes stands beside you, her hand finding yours. "We are not waiting to be canonized," she says. "We are already sacred." That night you light every candle in the hollow house. Leave the doors open. Sleep with your heads high. Let them come. You've written yourselves into the world, and words, once spoken, do not burn easily. The hollow house is glowing. Every window spills golden light into the forest night like a silent trumpet. The scent of tallow and rosemary wafts through the air. It's reckless, the way you leave the doors open, the candles lit, your voices rising in song while you move through the rooms, but you're past the point of worrying about who might be watching. If the church wants a spectacle, you're giving them one. Let them see what heresy looks like when it's dressed in joy. That night, someone paints a mural in the refectory. It begins as a lark, just a charcoal outline of a cloaked figure holding a quill. But then more hands join in. Isolde mixes pigment from crushed berries and egg yolk. Linnet adds gold flake stolen from a bishop's travelling chest years ago. By the time it's done, the wall glows with colour. It's not a saint, not anyone holy by the church's standards. It's a woman, face turned upward, robes fluttering like wings. Behind her, flames form a halo, not destructive, but warming. Below her feet, an open book. One page reads "We lived," the other, "We loved." You step back, eyes burning. It's the most sacred thing you've ever seen. It's not the only sacred thing in the house. In the chapel, someone has been painting frescoes. Small, hidden ones, up in the corners of the vaulted ceiling and behind the altar curtain. They started weeks ago, quietly, and now you notice them everywhere. A woman kissing another's cheek under a canopy of stars. Two hands twined together, not in prayer, but in pleasure. A nun in full habit cradling a child, her face weary but calm. One image stops you cold. 3 women reading a book by candlelight surrounded by animals. A fox, a crow, a cat curled in one lap. The caption beneath is written in Latin, but you, translated easily. Where God refused to dwell, we built something better. You find Isolde up on a scaffold, brush in hand, painting details into the wing of a strange angelic creature that looks suspiciously like Lynette with a sword and smirk. You've been busy, you say. Isolde grins. We needed a new gospel. Historically, frescoes like these did exist, though rarely preserved. In one Italian convent, a hidden chamber was found behind the main chapel wall during renovations in the 20th century. The walls were covered in paintings, some standard religious fare, others more ambiguous. One scholar noted the abundance of non-scriptural female figures and suggested they were allegorical representations of virtues, but others pointed out the body language, the hand placements, the longing in the eyes, not allegory, intimacy. Of course, church historians often brush these aside. Symbolic, they said, or the product of overzealous novices without theological training. But the paint tells a different story. You decide to document your own. With Agnes and Lynette, you begin creating a visual codex, the Book of Quiet Visions. You sketch the frescoes, the mural, even the carvings in the chapel doorframe that no one noticed until Isolde traced them in chalk. You catalogue them all, not with church-sanctioned commentary, but with lived experience. This figure represents Agnes. She planted the first garden. This mark was carved by Elsbeth, after her first full night of sleep in years. These stars were painted during the night we sang all the way through the storm. It becomes a kind of a living archive, not just what was seen, but what it meant. You realise this is the thing the church fears most, not blasphemy, not rebellion, but memory, the permanence of it, the refusal to be erased. And then, one morning, a new arrival changes everything. Her name is Sister Benedict. She wears the habit of a formal abbey, the kind with locked doors and iron gates. Her hair is hidden, her eyes are sharp. She looks, at first glance, like trouble, but she doesn't come with authority. She comes with a wrapped bundle and trembling hands. When she opens it, you gasp. It's a scroll, illuminated, gold-trimmed. At the top, Recordum Sororum, the names of the sisters, over 300 names, handwritten, catalogued by age, skill and last known location. Some marked vanished, some marked exiled, some marked only with a slash through the name. These were the women of our house, Benedict whispers. They were taken, punished, forgotten, but I saved the names. You look closer. The final page is blank, until she picks up your quill and writes one more. Me. And then, one by one, you all add your own. You copy the entire scroll into the sister book. Frame it between 2 poems and a pressed violet from the garden. You seal the original in wax leather and hide it beneath the floor, because if the church ever comes, it will be the first thing they'd burn. But now it's in more than one place. And then something happens that leaves you stunned. One of the frescoes, the one behind the altar, of the Book and the Flames, starts appearing in other places. On the back wall of a barn 50 miles east, on the floor of a forgotten mill near the coast, carved into a tree stump along the river, always the same shape, always the same image. No one claims credit. But the message is clear. The gospel is spreading, not the one they gave you, the one you made, and then the letter arrives. Again. But this time it's different. No seal, no threats, just 3 lines. We will not stop you. We will not protect you. But we are watching, and we are learning. Signed only with a cross and a small flame. Agnes reads it and smiles. We've become teachers. And maybe that's the final heresy, that you, fugitives, lovers, scribes, midwives, sinners, are no longer hiding. You're leading. So you keep painting, you keep writing, you keep living your gospel out loud, because the frescoes are not just art, they are proof that you were here, that love lived here, that women, once silenced, filled every wall with truth until the silence had no place left to hide. The novices don't know, not yet. They arrive in 1s and 2s, with dirt under their nails and hollow eyes, too young to carry what they already have. Some are barely more than children. One, 15 at most, won't speak above a whisper for days. Another has burns on her hand she won't explain. You take them in anyway, no questions. You've stopped asking those unless someone offers the answers themselves. You give them bread, a blanket, and the same promise you give everyone who crosses into the hollow house. You're safe here. For as long as you stay, no one owns you. But safety takes time to believe in. Especially for girls like these. They move like prey at first, flinching from loud noises, watching the shadows in doorways, sleeping with fists clenched. They expect rules, you realise. Expect someone to slap the spoon from their mouth if they take too much stew or punish them for laughing too loudly at supper. They don't know what it means to be free. Not really. Not yet. So you start slow. You show them how to mend robes, how to boil tea, how to clean wounds and lace up boots and keep their voices strong even when they're afraid. You teach them Latin, not to impress the church, but so they can read the old books and decide for themselves what words are worth carrying forward. Agnes sits with them every evening by the fire, reading aloud from the sister book in her gentle, weather-worn voice. She never explains what the stories mean. She just reads, lets the silences between the words do the explaining. One night the youngest girl, the one who wouldn't speak, finally raises her hand and asks what a psalter is. You explain. She listens. Then quietly she says, "I want to write one. My own. Not for God." For her, she doesn't say who her is. No one makes her. Historically, convent novices were often between the ages of 12 and 16, sent away from their families for reasons ranging from poverty to scandal to unwanted pregnancies. They entered cloisters barely educated and were taught obedience before anything else. The idea of giving them a voice, a pen, or worse, agency, was nearly unthinkable. But even then, some found a way. One surviving journal from the 15th century, attributed only to Marjorie of the North Cell, includes entries that scholars initially dismissed as juvenile nonsense. But closer examination revealed something astonishing. Coded poetry, references to shared meals stolen in the night, and intimate lines written in the margins next to another name. Helena. Marjorie's writing, buried inside what was assumed to be a record of daily prayers, may be the earliest example of a novice writing not about sainthood but against it. You tell this story to the girls. The effect is instant. They start writing too, scribbling in the backs of borrowed notebooks, on the margins of practice sheets, in the dust on the chapel floor. And it's not always profound. Sometimes it's a drawing of a rabbit in a bishop's hat. Sometimes it's nonsense rhymes or letters to no one. But sometimes, it's beautiful. One writes, "I was never taught to pray, but now I speak in flowers. Daisies for anger, peonies for fear, violets for her name in my mouth." You save that one. Ink it into the sister book. Add a pressed violet next to the page. Some of the older sisters begin guiding the novices gently. Elsbeth teaching them stitching. Isolde showing them how to mix pigment and not poison themselves in the process. Lynette becomes a kind of fierce older sister to them all, slipping them bits of sweetbread when no one's looking and warning them about the dangers of men who smile too quickly. Agnes and you take the evenings. You teach the things no monastery would dare. How to spot a lie wrapped in scripture. How to love without apology. How to listen to your body without shame. How to speak a no so clearly it sounds like a psalm. But not everything is soft and glowing. One day, one of the girls, Mana, is caught scribbling a note during supper. Nothing dangerous, just a limerick about a nun and a goat. But it makes you realise something. You haven't yet told them what happened before. So that night, you gather them by the hearth. You tell them the truth. About the cloister you came from. About Father Leon. About the tunnel. The wine cart. The fire ring. About the women who never made it out. The ones who were taken. The ones who still whisper in the bones of these walls. You don't spare them the hard parts. When you finish, they sit quietly, their eyes round and wet. Then one of them, Jassa, stubborn as nettles, says, "Did anyone ever stop you?" "No," you say. "Did they try?" "Of course." She nods, slowly. "Then I want to stay." And the others do too. You give them space in the sister book, a chapter of their own, titled Daughters of the Second Fire. They choose the name. It's their way of claiming inheritance, not of blood, but of belief. And soon, the novices aren't novices anymore. They're weavers of their own stories. They copy pages, bind scrolls, paint their own saints, barefoot, laughing, sometimes holding hands with lovers in gardens that stretch on forever. Agnes writes a new hymn. It's sung in rounds, and the youngest girls pick it up quickly. We are the sisters of no one's silence. We are the prayers that speak in fire. We are the cloisters built from kindness. We are the daughters of women who rise. You write it into the sister book in red ink. At the top of the page, you draw 3 violets. One for the girls who arrived broken, one for the ones who stayed, and one for the ones who are still coming, even now, following the scent of smoke and stories. You never planned to become a teacher, but that's what happens when you survive long enough. You stop hiding, and you start planting. You hear about the Abbey of St Lucia the same way you hear about most places these days. By rumour, by whisper, by a note folded into a wheel of cheese. It starts with a joke. The sisters at St Lucia are too loud for the saints to sleep. Then someone adds, "They're burning incense that doesn't come from any church I know." Then, a travelling herbalist sits at your fire one evening, unwraps a bundle of crushed herbs and says, "They call it the Pleasure Convent." She says it without judgment, more admiration than anything, and that's what catches your attention. You didn't think there were others like you. You were wrong. It takes a month to find them. The abbey sits in the hills beyond the river, tucked behind a veil of olive trees and crumbling rock. You almost miss it. No signage, no road, just a crooked path lined with wild thyme and carved stones. When you finally reach the gates, you're met not by guards or priests, but by a woman with deep smile lines, a thick braid down her back, and hands dusted with flour. "Visiting?" she asks. "Or staying?" You say, "Both, maybe." She grins and leads you in. The Abbey of St Lucia is nothing like what you expected. No high towers, no stiff-backed discipline. The buildings are squat and sun-drenched, half swallowed by flowering vines. Inside, the walls are painted with strange murals, women holding each other in circles, laughing, dancing, covered in gold leaf and blue sky. The air smells like lavender and citrus. There's music drifting in from somewhere, flutes and clapping, a meal being prepared with too much garlic and zero restraint. Agnes squeezes your hand. Is this heaven? You're greeted by the abbess, a woman named Meliora, in a robe the colour of ripe figs. She doesn't kiss your ring. She doesn't ask your lineage. She just says, "We've heard of the Hollow House," and then she winks. Your stories travel faster than the bishop's. Historically, stories like this sound too convenient. An entire convent that rebels, openly and consistently, without being crushed by church authority. But they existed. Maybe not many, maybe not for long. But the records show them. Communities marked as irregular or suspicious, accused of heresy by omission, or over familiar relations. Some were absorbed into the system, others vanished. But a few left traces, one even left behind an inventory list, 6 loaves, 2 bottles of wine, 1 forbidden text. The name of the text was never recorded. St Lucia is one of those places that's not supposed to survive, but it has. Maybe because it's remote, maybe because someone powerful is looking the other way, maybe because no one believes it could exist in the first place, but it does, and you are welcomed not as a guest but as kin. They feed you first, flatbread and olives and soft cheese made from sheep's milk. They serve wine, rich and dark, and no one pretends it's ceremonial. Afterward you walk the grounds. There are gardens, yes, but also bathing pools carved into the rock lined with candles, a scriptorium filled with books not just copied but authored, poetry, treatises, maps, herbal compendiums with notes in the margins like use this one if you really don't want to see him again. There's a room full of instruments, another full of silks, and in one tower there's something that makes you stop cold. A mural, painted on the inside of the dome, a woman with a fox at her feet, a book in her hand, a fire ring above her head. You recognise it instantly. That's you. Meliora sees your face and nods. Word of mouth becomes word of brush, and brush becomes memory. You spend days there, talking, comparing, learning. The women of St Lucia share their stories freely. One was a noblewoman who walked away from her estate and never looked back. One escaped from a forced marriage by drugging the wedding feast. One simply woke up one day, said no more, and walked barefoot into the woods until she found someone who said yes. There are lovers here, pairs who walk together and don't flinch, triads who sleep in the same bed, older women who serve as guides, midwives, guards of both body and soul. There's no one model for what they've built. It's messy, loud, gorgeous. You tell them about the Hollow House. You read from the sister book. When you finish, the room is silent for a breath, then full of clapping. Meliora pours you more wine. We thought we were alone. So did we, you say. You're invited to stay, and you almost do. But on your fifth night, Agnes wakes you before dawn. You walk the olive path in silence, hands warm between you. We have to go back, she says, not as a question. You nod. Because the Hollow House is yours. It needs you. And now, you know how not alone you really are. Before you leave, Meliora gives you a gift, a scroll. When you open it, you find a map. Dozens of places marked with tiny fire rings. Some are names you've heard, others you haven't. All across the countryside, all women. You're part of something bigger than you knew, Meliora says. 1,000 fires burning under the skin of the world. You return home changed. You hang the map in the chapel. The novices gasp. Lynette swears. Sister Mare just says, well, it's about time. You hold a celebration that night. Feast. Laughter. Dancing in the courtyard under a moon that looks like it's eavesdropping. The mural in the refectory is updated. Now, behind the woman with the book, there are others. Women across hills and rivers, their arms outstretched. You take up the brush and add one final stroke. A small fox curled in the corner, watching it all. You don't believe in saints the way you used to. But if holiness means building what no one else would let you have, then the Abbey of St Lucia is the holiest place you've ever seen. Except, maybe, for home. The letter is nailed to the gate. That's the first warning. Not placed gently, not folded under a stone or whispered across a fire. Nailed, like a challenge. Big blocky script, heavy with threats and the kind of holy fury you can smell from a mile off. It reads, "Heretics and false sisters, your time is over. You defile sacred roles and claim the cloak of holiness while revelling in sin. You will be cleansed. Fire will make you pure. Repent or be judged." Signed with a name none of you recognise, but the symbol below it is unmistakable. A crooked cross wrapped in thorns. You've seen it before. Once carved into the door of a house that burned 2 nights later. Another time scrawled on a roadside shrine with a dagger still stuck in the base. It belongs to the Order of the Suffering Flame, a fringe sect, technically not church-sanctioned, but tolerated, especially when they aim their rage at the right targets. Women like you stand in the garden, the letter trembling in your hand, the iron nail still warm from the sun. Around you the hollow house hums with life, novices singing as they peel potatoes, Linné sharpening blades, Isolde painting a sun onto a cracked bit of chapel wall. And yet now the air shifts. The tension is instant. The weight dropped into a still pond. "They've come this close," Agnes murmurs. "That means they're near." You don't reply. Not yet. You're listening for something deeper, the rhythm of fear beginning to pulse behind walls. That night, you gather everyone. Even the fox shows up, perching like a statue on the outer ledge of the garden wall, eyes shining gold. You read the letter aloud. No one cries, no one begs, but the silence after is thick enough to cut. "They've burned others," Linus says at last. "3 I know. The house near Brienne, the granary that hid Margot, and..." She swallows, hard. "St Lucia?" you ask. A slow nod. "No survivors," she says. "So they think." Because of course there were survivors. At least 2 made it to the Hollow House last week, half-starved, their robes scorched, voices hoarse from screaming into smoke. They haven't spoken much, but one of them, Amelin, left a single message carved into her arm with ink and thread. They burned the walls, not the words. You do not take that lightly. Historically, the Inquisition left an inconsistent footprint in convent life. While most inquisitors focused on high-profile heresies, Cathars, witches, Protestants, there were cases, scattered and largely undocumented, of so-called rogue investigators punishing nuns deemed disobedient or unclean. Inquisitorial documents refer to these efforts with phrases like necessary moral cleansing and rectification of female deviancy. Records are patchy, survivors even patchier. Scholars argue whether these burnings were centrally organised or carried out by local zealots, operating with quiet encouragement from higher authorities. The debate continues, but in your world, there's no time for scholarly interpretation, only action. You go underground. Not literally. Your tunnels are too few, too old. But you vanish from sight. Smoke from the hearth is reduced. Candles are shielded. The map of Allied firing houses is buried in a sealed clay vessel behind the chapel. The sister book is split again, pages tucked into satchels sewn into skirts, hidden behind false bricks, and you wait. But hiding isn't enough. Not anymore. You've built too much, come too far, so you prepare for the worst. Sister Mare oversees the evacuation drills. She walks the younger girls through each step like it's scripture. You dig fresh roots into the forest. Plant caches of dried food, water, and tools in hollow trees. Linnet trains a group in knife defence, non-lethal if possible, fatal if necessary. You hate that this is what it's come to. But you remember the first time you ran. How disorganised it was. How close you came to being caught. You won't let that happen again. You write new pages for the sister book, not poetry this time, protocol. If they come by fire, exit through the garden wall, west path, follow fox marks. If they come by blade, scatter, never engage alone. If captured, do not name others. Say nothing, die only when you must. You hope no one ever has to read those pages, but hope is not a strategy. And then, one night, it happens. A column of smoke rises in the eastern woods. You climb the old watchtower, barely more than a stump now, and squint through the trees. Another firing house. You don't know which, but you know who. The Order has begun their purge. And this time, they're not just after dissent, they're after memory. That's what this is, you realise. Not just a holy war, it's an erasure campaign. If they can't stop you from writing, they'll burn your libraries. If they can't stop your stories, they'll kill the ones who carry them. You don't sleep that night. Agnes wraps her arms around you, forehead pressed to yours. "I keep thinking," she whispers, "what if we'd never started the sister book?" But you shake your head. "We didn't start it," you say. "We just continued it." And that's the worst part for the ones trying to erase you. They don't understand that this isn't a book anymore. It's a body. It lives in every woman who's ever passed through your gates, in every story memorised, every song passed on, every mural drawn on the inside of someone's mind. You cannot burn a book that breathes. You spend the next week reaching out to every known firing site. Not by messenger, but through the night web. A secret system of candlelight and shadow signals passed from tower to tower, roof to roof, a flicker, a colour, a symbol traced in ash on a barn door. And every night, more answers come, still alive, hiding, resisting. You add a new mural to the chapel wall. It's not of saints, it's of burning houses. But above each flame rises a phoenix, feathers made of text. And at the top you write, "They burn, we rise. They forget. We write. It becomes your mantra. You hear that phrase whispered by novices when they carry water. You see it scratched into a spoon handle, into the bottom of a shoe. carved into a tree on the edge of the forest. One morning a young girl brings you a bird, dead, a crow with singed feathers. Around its leg a small scroll. The note is simple. We are still writing. The flame has not won. Send more names. You do. You send the names of every sister in your house, every one you've ever known. You write them in blood and wine and ash, because even if you must vanish again, they will know you were here, and they will know what you refused to forget. You've seen fugitives before. Desperate girls who burst through the trees in the middle of the night, bleeding, breathless, broken. But nothing prepares you for this one. She doesn't burst. She glides, steps through the hollow house's threshold like it's her birthright, as though the forest parted for her personally. And she isn't dressed like a nun. She wears rough travelling clothes, a man's cloak, and a blade strapped to her thigh. Her face is half covered, a scarf pulled high, but her eyes, sharp, intelligent, rimmed in kohl, scan the room in one practiced sweep and land on you. You're the one they call the chronicler, she says. You blink. No one's called you that out loud before. Yes, you say cautiously. She removes the scarf with a smirk. Good. Then you're the one I need. And just like that, she's in. She gives her name as Roswin, but adds, that's just one of them. She says it like a joke, but when Lynette offers to show her to a bed, she declines. I don't sleep here. Too easy to be cornered. Instead, she vanishes into the rafters like a cat. By morning, she's earned a bedroll anyway. 3 stolen crates of flour and a stolen letter from the bishop's own courier bag tend to buy a bit of goodwill. She's not a nun, not anymore, maybe not ever. Her story comes in bits and pieces. A convent somewhere near the Rhine, a fire that wasn't an accident, a priest who went missing and was never found. She doesn't ask for shelter. She doesn't ask for much at all, really. But you give her a room anyway. Eventually. Why are you here? You ask her one day, watching her sharpen a knife that looks far too ceremonial for kitchen duty. She looks up. Because someone has to get the names out. And that's when she shows you the list. It's tucked into her belt, folded 6 times over. Inked in code, then rewritten in the margins of an old psalter. Each name belongs to a woman currently imprisoned, disappeared, or dead at the hands of the Order of the Suffering Flame. Some have been officially condemned. Others were simply lost during transport. But Roswin has been tracking them, one by one. A ledger of the vanished. You recognise 3 names. One belonged to a sister from a firing house near Bordeaux. Another was a midwife who passed through Hollow House for 2 days, then vanished into the woods. The third is carved into your chapel door. Roswin doesn't flinch. I'm finding them, or finding what's left. Either way, they will not be forgotten. You feel something twist in your chest. This is what history never accounts for. Women who were never allowed to be fugitives. Just gone. No trial, no record, no one asking where they went. Because when women disappear, the church calls it purification. But you know better. It's erasure. Historically, some inquisitorial orders made formal registries of fallen women, but these documents often used vague terms: relocated, punished, corrected, purged. The details of what happened, burnings, executions, imprisonment in remote monastic cells, were rarely recorded. Some scholars argue these women were invited to disappear, encouraged into silence. Others believe they were systematically eliminated, especially those who were literate, loud, or connected to dissident texts. Roswin believes it too. She teaches you how to read the margins. See this notation? She points to a line in a copied hymn. Not a musical note, a signal. The sister who wrote this was crying for help. It's a fire ring disguised as an accent mark. You begin scanning your own collection again, looking closer. You find dozens of tiny marks, slashes in margins, dots slightly off kilter, spacing that's just wrong enough to be intentional. One psalm even spells out a name when you read the first letter of each line. They've been reaching out this whole time. Roswin brings with her more than secrets. She brings tactics, methods of smuggling letters using layers of beeswax, a coded language of pressed, flower petals, a formula for invisible ink made from elderberry and vinegar. She even introduces the girls to the art of disguise. Turns out some of the safest women in Europe are those who dress like monks, or more precisely like travelling scholars. You sew false habits, layer garments with hidden pouches, teach your youngest how to walk like they belong on a pilgrimage, and then, the true miracle, one of the vanished returns. Her name is Alina. You don't recognise her at first. Her hair has been shorn, her wrists scarred with what looks like shackles, her voice hoarse from months, or maybe years, of silence. But when she steps into the hollow house, she collapses and whispers, "I found the mark. You're real." Roswin found her, smuggled her out during a purification march staged as a reburial ceremony, one of the Order's public spectacles where repentant women are paraded in chains before being sent off to vanish. Roswin slipped Alina out in a coffin meant for relics. Her grin when she tells the story is dark and glorious. Alina sleeps for 3 days. When she wakes, you offer her tea. She shakes her head. "I want ink," she says. You hand her a quill. She begins writing immediately, a testimony, not just of what happened to her, but what happened to the women around her. One line stands out. "They never imagined we might survive long enough to tell the truth. You add it to the sister book. You add all of it. Because this is how you fight now, not just with blades or tunnels or code, but with the names, the words, the written defiance of memory. The fugitives come more often now, some in disguise, some in chains, freed by other hands, some with broken bones, some with nothing but stories. You take them all in, and some of them stay, not as guests, as sisters. You give them names, pages, songs. You hang a banner in the garden stitched by 12 hands over 3 days. It reads, "Fugitives, heretics, sisters, saints. We answer only to ourselves," and below it, the fire ring, the symbol no torch can burn. Roswin watches the banner flutter in the wind, arms crossed. "You know," she says, "some of them think you're a legend." You arch an eyebrow. "Do I look like a legend?" She laughs. "Number." But neither did any of the others. That's how legends work. You smile and hand her the next page of names. She disappears into the woods again by morning, but not before she turns back and says, "Keep the fire lit. I'll be sending more. You know the fire is coming before you smell the smoke. It's the way the birds vanish. The woods fall unnaturally quiet, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. It's the air, thick, heavy, still in that too perfect way that means something awful is stirring just beyond the trees. The girls know it too. They move with hushed urgency, eyes flicking to the tree line every few minutes, hands twitching toward hidden blades, escape satchels, pages of the sister book, already stitched into their sleeves. The hollow house has lasted longer than anyone expected. But nothing lasts forever, not even safe places, not even sanctuaries made of love and stubbornness and lavender soap. Agnes is the one who sees the glow first. She's on watch, perched in the old tower with Lynette. You're in the chapel, tucking the last of the girls' testimonies into a false floorboard, when she bursts in. "They're coming," she says, and her voice is calm, too calm. Lynette follows, pale and silent. You nod once. Then everything moves like it's underwater. The evacuation plan unfolds like a dance you've practiced too many times to forget. Rations are gathered. The youngest girls are paired with the fastest runners. The Book of Strange Companions is tucked into a waterproof pouch. The sister book, what's left of it, is divided among 5 women, each with their own path into the woods. The mural wall is painted over in black ash. The tunnels are cleared, the passwords are spoken. You kneel once in the chapel before you leave and kiss the cracked stone where the fox first laid the carving. You whisper, "Thank you," and tuck the bone charm into your boot, and then you run. Historically, entire convents have vanished before. Sometimes it was political, sometimes it was disease, sometimes it was fire, and the church insisted the women had died faithfully. But sometimes, just sometimes, the records go blank, a scribbled line, an ink smudge, a note in a margin that says only, "The sisters are gone. May God judge them mercifully." That's how you want to vanish, not screaming, not begging, just gone. But you don't get that luxury tonight, because the order is faster than you thought. You're halfway through the woods when the sky behind you turns orange. You turn and see it, the hollow house burning. It's beautiful. That's the part that nearly breaks you. The fire wraps the old chapel tower in light. The frescoes burn. The walls sing with heat. For a moment you swear the smoke curls into words, Latin phrases you'd memorized in girlhood, now smeared into the sky like prophecy. You imagine the paintings bleeding colour, the murals screaming their last truths into the wind. You feel something inside you crack open. You fall to your knees. Agnes pulls you up. "Don't look," she says, "but you have to look, just once more. You see the fox, perched on a stone outcropping, watching the fire, not afraid, not running, just watching. You blink, and she's gone, and you start running again. The forest is louder now, cracking branches, pounding feet, the roar of fire chasing wind. But beneath it you hear something else, voices, a chant. One of the younger girls has started singing. It's the hymn Agnes wrote months ago. We are the sisters of no one's silence. We are the prayers that speak in fire. The others pick it up. We are the cloisters built from kindness. We are the daughters of women who rise. They are not running in fear. They are singing. Through ashen blood and burnt beginnings we write, we love, we still survive. You're sobbing now, but you're still running. The order doesn't catch you. They don't even see you. They find the empty house, the scattered pages left behind like breadcrumbs. They think they've won. They haven't. Because here's the truth. You planned for this. For years. The fire was never the end. It was the signal. Elsewhere, as the hollow house burns, others rise. In the north, the fire ring near Calais lights its own torch in solidarity. In the east, a vineyard cellar opens its doors to 4 more girls carrying satchels of song. In the south, a converted mill begins etching new murals across its stone walls, painted in soot and wine. The network lives. The sister book lives. You live. The next few days are hard. You sleep in trees. You drink from streams. You bury one of the older sisters when her lungs collapse from smoke. You wrap the youngest in wool and hum lullabies into their hair. But no one breaks. Because the hollow house was never walls. It was people. And people move. People survive. A week later, you reach the next safe house. A crumbling shepherd's chapel high in the hills. You find a candle already burning in the window. You knock once. The door opens. Meliora stands there. She smiles. "Welcome home." You collapse into her arms, and for the first time since the flames rose, you allow yourself to rest. You've already begun rebuilding. The pages stitched into sleeves are read aloud by firelight. The girls paint a new mural on the chapel ceiling, and you, sitting beside Agnes, hands stained with ink and dirt, begin a new chapter. The house that could not burn. The stories live, the names live. The fire may have taken your walls, but your history, your secret, sacred, sex-laced, joy-drunk, defiantly holy history, it survives. The wind carries whispers, even now. That's how you know the story didn't end with the fire. It just shifted forms like smoke curling from a hidden hearth, wrapping around trees, slipping into cracks of stone and memory. You sit in the doorway of what used to be a chapel, and is now more of a barn, watching the hills turn gold under the afternoon sun. The sheep don't mind the repurposing. Neither do the women. The girls are stronger now. Some have grown, some have left, carrying firings stitched into their belts or carved into their walking sticks. Some still sleep curled up in the straw, fingers twitching as they dream of cloisters they never really escaped. But all of them carry pieces of the hollow house, tucked in marrow and mouth. The sister book is heavier than ever. It now lives in 3 separate volumes, the original, the hidden, and the rewritten. You keep them in a wooden chest carved with vines and foxes and hands holding quills. Each woman who passes through adds something, a name, a line, a drawing, a scent. One woman pressed fennel into. The margins, another added dried pomegranate seeds like punctuation. Someone once even kissed a page. You kept the lipstick mark. The fire taught you that no page is safe unless it's planted in many soils. So now you duplicate. Everything. You've trained new scribes, taught girls how to memorize whole chapters in case ink runs dry or parchment runs scarce. A 9-year-old girl named Fee can recite 72 names from the ledger of the vanished, forward and backward, in Latin and in song. They say memory is a kind of rebellion. You say it's a kind of resurrection. A curious traveller stumbles upon you one day. A merchant's son who took a wrong turn looking for a monastery with a famous relic. What he finds is this strange compound of barefoot women, some in robes, some in pants, none of them behaving with the reverence he expects. He watches a group of novices play a game with dice that clearly includes betting and mild cursing. He overhears someone read from the Acts of Sister Aurelia, and his ears go red. Agnes gives him tea anyway. He asks carefully if you're some kind of sect. You smile. We're a history. He doesn't understand, of course, not really, but he leaves with a small scroll in his pocket and a single phrase inked along the seam. They could not burn what we became. You know he'll repeat it. That's how it spreads now. Not by force, not by crusade, by whisper. The same way it always began. Scholars argue, still to this day, about whether convents like yours truly existed, if fire-ring houses were real or invented, if the sister book is authentic or an elaborate forgery dreamed up by a lonely monk with too much imagination. There are debates about the art, the poems, the coded songs. Some claim the fire-ring was a myth, a symbol. Others insist it was real and dangerous. You sit with that. You're not interested in convincing them. You're interested in what comes next. Because even now, even with the hollow house gone, something's stirring again. The women keep arriving. Some come with scrolls, some with stories. One brings a small child who speaks only in rhyme. Another arrives with a basket full of carved bones, each etched with a different name. She buries them in the garden and whispers, "Now they'll grow again." You don't know what that means, but you let her stay. You always let them stay. And every so often, when the moon is full and the chapel glows with wine-laced hymns, someone paints something new on the wall. Not saints, not martyrs, just women. Sometimes they're dancing, sometimes kissing, sometimes reading. One even shows a nun holding hands with a woman who has antlers. No one questions it. And Agnes, your Agnes, is still here. Her hands are wrinkled now, and her eyesight has faded a bit. But her voice is strong as ever. She teaches the new ones how to sing, how to write love poems that rhyme, then break the rhyme on purpose, how to hold their shoulders high when someone calls them impure. You lie beside her each night, your fingers brushing, and think, this is the kind of holiness no church ever planned for. Here's your last quirky fact. A recent dig outside a burned convent site turned up a ceramic cup, etched with a fox, a book, and a series of notations in coded Latin. The archaeologist dismissed it as a child's toy, but the intern who translated the markings found something else. We are not myths. We are unfinished prayers with dirty feet and fire in our mouths. They didn't publish it, of course, not in the final paper, but they kept the cup. They keep it on their desk. You know this because they sent you a letter, folded into a basket of walnuts. Inside, they wrote, "I believe you." You hang the letter beside the door, so the next girl who walks in sees it before she even says her name. This is how your story lives now. Not behind locked gates, not buried under inkless names, but right here, in warm bread and scribbled margins, in foxes who appear just once and vanish forever, in girls who write their first poems on the soles of their shoes, in kisses stolen in herb gardens, in the sister book and the shadows it now walks in, and in you, the chronicler, the keeper of fire, the woman who, all those years ago, stood in a chapel and whispered, "I will remember," and you did. Now the night is soft and your breath is steady, the long arc of the story settling around you like a shawl worn thin with retellings. The fire is low, just embers now, and outside the trees lean into each other as though they too have listened closely and don't want to forget. You close your eyes and picture her, the girl you once were, barefoot on the cold chapel floor, ink-stained fingers clutching a stolen page, heart pounding with equal parts fear and defiance. She didn't know then what she was building. Not really. She just knew she couldn't stay quiet. And now, she's written into every corner of the world that still listens for the quiet tap of a pen on vellum. She lives in girls who refuse to call their bodies shameful, in women who paint murals no bishop will bless, in every fire ring scratched into stone behind an altar, or into the bark of a tree in a forest someone swore was empty. And you who walked alongside her, you remember. You remember the chapel, the garden, the laughter at midnight, the scent of rosemary on fingertips and forbidden kisses in the dark. You remember the burnings, the songs, the fox, and still, through it all, you survived. You wrote, you loved, and you became the history they tried to erase. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath deepens, let the story settle in your bones. Let the names you've learned tonight keep you company in dreams, because you're not alone. You never were. They couldn't burn the book. and they sure as hell couldn't burn you. Sleep well, sister. You've earned your place in the fire ring.